Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. We've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. March 13, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Beyond the Mat Controversy, New York Daily News stories on wrestling deaths and drugs. More. By Dave Meltzer. The controversy over the movie Beyond the Mat grew this past week when pressure tactics from the WWF caused the USA Network, UPN and Chris Kraft Communications to all ban any advertising on any of their programs for the film. While some were surprised at the lengths Vince McMahon would go to attempt to bury the movie, it has been clear for some time by anyone who understands the with us or against us and no in-between philosophy of McMahon, that he felt the movie wasn't with us. If he felt he had the power to pressure entire networks into not carrying commercials, of course he would. The surprise was that the networks allowed him to exert that much influence as it regards advertising on non-wrestling programming, which shows the surprising power within television the WWF franchise holds, particularly with McMahon leveraging everyone against one another since his USA Network commitments come due in September. Such tactics, while apparently exceedingly rare when it comes to movies, are not unusual within the realm of television. For example, just in the Wrestling Wars world, TNT and TBS wouldn't air the phone commercial with Steve Austin and D'Lo Brown, while USA and UPN won't air the Spree commercial with Bill Goldberg. WWF has had a long-standing policy of not allowing what they perceive to be competition wrestling products advertised within the body of their show, but this is the first time they've exerted influence to all shows on the networks they air on. The only known example of a network refusing to air commercials for a movie was NBC refusing to air commercials for Dirty Work. The star of the movie was Norm Macdonald, a former Saturday Night Live cast member who had been fired from the show by NBC Entertainment president Don Ohlmeyer for questionable language on a live broadcast. Macdonald had gone on several talk shows bashing Ohlmeyer. Ohlmeyer then pressured the network into not running any ads for the movie. In the Memphis commercial appeal, the day of the movie opening on March 3, Jerry Lawler was quoted categorizing Blaustein as a jerk, claiming he deceived the WWF by presenting his project as a minor documentary that might premiere on PBS rather than what it is, a potentially highly profitable feature film distributed by Lionsgate and financed by Ron Howard's Imagine Entertainment Company. As anyone who has followed the idea of this movie from when it was first reported on in this publication, the first time in 1995, the name Ron Howard and Universal Studios were mentioned from the beginning with the idea of a Pumping Iron type of movie. Pumping Iron was a very well-received mid-1970s documentary which many credit for very briefly taking the strange world of bodybuilding out of the closets and being the springboard for the career Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno. It was the Howard name that had the wrestling world buzzing about the project from the start, and it was always talked about as having the goal be, like Pumping Iron, to have a theatrical release. Because of the publicity, the movie, which was awarded Best Documentary at the Cinequest Film Festival in San Jose, opened strong in Memphis, being the second highest grossing movie in the city of the weekend. It didn't do as well in Charlotte, where there was no local publicity and they were relying more on the ads that were pulled. The ban has not spread to the local station level. There have been ads for the movie on UPN stations, but not members of the Chris Kraft chain, bought at a local level, as well as on the USA Network purchased in local markets, just as the acclaimed ECW video game ads as well as house show and TNN ads for the show have appeared on Raw in specific markets through buying local ads, and just as WWF and WCW when doing house shows have bought local time on their competitors' cable show. There were ads taken at a local level that aired in some markets on the USA Network on March 6 with the added tagline that this is the film Vince McMahon doesn't want you to see. The movie also had national ads all week during WCW and ECW broadcasts, even though the movie focuses more on WWF, WCW's competitor, and doesn't even mention the existence of WCW. The New York Daily News ran a three-part series on pro wrestling written by Kevin McCoy, bringing some new facts to light regarding some deaths and arrests of wrestlers as they pertain to the industry as well as covering the growth of the industry, WWF in particular. The series started on March 2 with an article on the popularity of wrestling. The story talked about the growth of the industry and cross-promotions, with numbers far more accurate than most media stories have been through the years. It also included a sidebar of how SmackDown saved the UPN network from possible extinction, and a brief history piece. The history piece, unfortunately like all history in a sport where most of the history is handed down by wrestlers and thus has questionable credibility, was probably the weakest piece. It had the stories of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln as wrestlers, and then talked about the two matches in 1908 and 1911 between Frank Gotch and George Hockenschmidt. It brought up the question as to whether those matches were scripted, with a denial coming from Mike Chapman, a well-respected amateur wrestling historian with very limited knowledge of the pro game. It is generally believed by the few still alive old enough to know the players, and again, these are wrestlers telling stories from wrestlers, that the first Gotch-Hockenschmidt match was a shoot. The second was originally to be a shoot, but Hockenschmidt suffered the famous knee injury ahead of time, and the knee injury absolutely was legit. The question as to how it happened is still subject for debate, as he limped for years and was never able to lift with his lower body the kind of weights he was famous for again, and wanted to pull out, but was told so many tickets had been sold in advance that he had to do it, and they agreed to a worked match where Gotch would win, but Hockenschmidt would save face by winning one fall. But Gotch double-crossed him once the match started and easily beat his injured foe in 2 straight falls. Chapman called the 1922 match, actually January 8, 1925 in Kansas City, where Strangler Lewis lost to Wayne Munn as the first title match thrown. Obviously that's not the case. Anyone with any knowledge of pro wrestling can see through the Gotch 1906 loss to Fred Beal as a worked finish. Gotch was knocked out when he hit his head on the ring post, then came back in a rematch a few weeks later and regained the title, and without question the vast majority of title switches and virtually the entire business as a whole after 1915 was a work, if not most before that date, as even studying Gotch's history seems to indicate working programs to build up matches. Munn, historically, as a college football star, was the first non-wrestler ever to be given the world title, and his failure to be able to keep the title when double-crossed 3 months later by Stanislaus Sabishko is why promoters as late as even the 70s tried to keep the NWA title on real legitimate wrestlers for fear of the double-cross. The second part, on March 3rd, had more meat, including breaking some new ground on often reported issues regarding drug usage in pro wrestling. It started with a story about the late Brian Pillman, with quotes from his wife, Melanie King, talking about his use of steroids, HGH and painkillers as a wrestler before his death. Cocaine was not mentioned in the article as a contributory cause of his heart attack. This led to an article on Indianapolis physician Dr. Joel Hackett, a friend of Pillman's, calling him one of the most dangerous threats to the wrestling industry, whose prescribed drugs were found next to the bodies of both Pillman and Lou Mucciolo, Louis Spicoli, at the time of their deaths. Vince McMahon was quoted in the article claiming that Pillman was tested for drugs before his death and he came up negative. Pillman told me shortly after taking the test that what would come up were dosages, and not extreme levels, of numerous painkillers he was taking. Later it came out he did not have extreme levels of any painkillers in the test, although he did have levels of many, but that he also tested positive for nandrolone, anabolic steroid decadurabolin. Pillman was unhappy, to the point of nearly quitting the company, over being singled out for a test at the time, claiming he had never gone on camera too loaded to perform, unlike one of the WWF's biggest stars at the time who had a reputation for doing so frequently but was never tested, and that another major star passed out on an airplane to where the situation was very scary, and also was never tested. He was never punished or suspended for the positive test result, perhaps because he claimed that the steroid was something he'd taken months in the past, and on occasion, nandrolone can show up in a test months after use. He died about a month later. By this point WWF had given up drug testing as a regular thing for 11 months, but because there were so many people in the organization questioning Pillman's behavior, which by this point had gone off the deep end, Jim Ross ordered Pillman to be tested. The story listed Tony Norris, Ahmed Johnson, Big T, as having flown to Indianapolis for painkillers and steroids prescribed illegally by Hackett. Norris acknowledged once having a drug problem, but claimed in the article that finding religion made him conquer the problem. It also listed Del Wilkes the Patriot as someone Hackett repeatedly prescribed large doses for. With Hackett's knowledge, Wilkes was distributing them illegally. Wilkes, whose pro wrestling career ended in 1997 after continual tricep tears, one while working in Japan and a second that ended his career while in the WWF. He was later arrested in both 1998 and 1999 for forging prescriptions for hydrocodone, a codeine-like drug. Wilkes of late has been shopping around the idea of a book that would reveal from an insider perspective the real drug situation within pro wrestling. Hackett refused to talk to the paper because he has an impending hearing regarding having his medical license pulled, but his attorney, David Hamilton, claimed a series of letters put the onus of blame on the WWF. Hackett complained to the WWF that he saw one wrestler buy 10 somas from another for $100 and charged another with selling painkillers in the dressing room. Hackett claimed the WWF barred him from contact with its performers and notified authorities about him in response. The actual banning of Hackett, along with other known drug doctors, from the dressing rooms, came almost immediately after the death of Pillman. While Hackett was considered the most dangerous within the WWF, or should have already learned its lessons about doctors dispensing drugs in dressing rooms from all the problems stemming from the Dr. George Zaharian trial in 1991, he was not singled out. So his story as to why he was banned from the dressing rooms, including claims not made in this story but made elsewhere that he was being singled out because he was black, holds no credence. WWF performers, against the company's directive, continued to provide Hackett with comp tickets to matches and remained in contact with him long after the letter to performers telling them to avoid contact. Even as late as Super Brawl 1998, just 1 week after the death of Spicoli, when Hackett's name within wrestling was hot because it was known he had prescribed the large amount of drugs found near Spicoli at the time of his death, Hackett was flown into San Francisco by a major WCW name. Spicoli often carried it, and as reported by his sister last year on the ESPN Outside the Line special, went to Tijuana as well to purchase drugs for bigger stars, which, scarily, may have been, and probably was, more direct a reason that he was getting a push at the time of his death than his in-ring ability. The story also noted the deaths of Bobby Duncombe Jr. and Rick Rude, along with at least hinting at the problems of Chris Candido and Tammy Sytch. It was the first major media story to list Rude's death being triggered by an accidental overdose of painkillers and sedatives. The October 7 report filed by the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office stated Rude died from hypoxic encephalopathy, brain injuries, due to acute intoxication by the combined effects of mixed medications and left ventricle hypertrophy heart attack. Dr. Eric Kiesel reported in the autopsy report the acute intoxication was caused by the combined effects of oxycodone. The amount in his system of this drug alone was more than at toxic levels, azepam, azalam and citalopram. The story noted Rude testified that he used steroids in the 1994 trial of McMahon. It also had a quote from Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale, who headed the drug testing in the WWF from early 1992 until it was dropped in late 1996, saying testing was dropped, in part, because the wrestlers didn't have the physiques the public wanted to see. McMahon claimed it was dropped because of high costs. At the time, the WWF was running deeply in the red and they had earmarked a great deal of money to the testing, something nobody else in the industry was doing, and because of the failure of other promoters to require testing. At the time, WWF had just fallen behind WCW about 5 months earlier in the ratings war, and it was an uneven playing field when it came to marketing wrestlers, as one company had noticeably less impressive physiques than the other due to one company seriously cracking down and the other providing lip service. Even more than marketing to the public, to many wrestlers, WCW became the place to be, even throwing aside money constraints, because drug testing has never been popular among the wrestlers because they live with the unrealistic expectations of beating up their bodies, traveling constantly, but still having to have their bodies looking out of the ordinary, something difficult, but not impossible, but only by those with very favorable genetics, which most wrestlers don't have, and incredible dedication, which many wrestlers have, to achieve without help. In addition, the WWF's testing included marijuana, which most in wrestling see as a relatively harmless recreational drug to help the body wind down and sleep after being keyed up in so much traveling that is believed by many to be less dangerous than the combination of alcohol and sleeping pills. WWF lost most of its big names: Hogan, who came back for a few months the next year, Warrior, Road Warriors, Vicious, Davey Boy Smith, and Jake Roberts, in the first few months of drug testing, although with the exception of Warrior and Smith, who were fired, all departed at least on the surface for other reasons. Steroids, which had become psychologically addicting to so many of the wrestlers used to walking around being larger than life, became more important to the big-name older wrestlers trying to maintain the unnatural physiques that had been their trademark. And despite his claims in 1991 of his promotional ability to make wrestling bigger than ever while promoting drug-free wrestlers, and for that matter, drug-free bodybuilders as well, McMahon was never able to over the long term successfully promote wrestling without the unnatural physiques, as the years of the drug testing coincide somewhat with the years of the company operating in the red ink that they finally dug themselves out of in late 1997 before flourishing the past 2 years. WWF even on television mocked WCW for allegedly failing to have real drug testing, even going so far as to on a television skit mocking their slogan at the time of "Where the Big Boys Play," to insinuate their big boys, and strongly insinuating Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, were able to stay so big because the company didn't have real drug testing. Just a few months after the skit where WWF on television called WCW's drug testing policy into question and challenged them to adhere to the same testing procedures as WWF, WWF quietly dropped testing, and the wrestlers started getting bigger and more cut up. If Pillman's death was somehow more related to his use of HGH, which can't be tested for in drug tests, although McMahon numerous times during that period claimed it could, then drug testing would not have given a signal of a problem and prevented Pillman's death. If cocaine usage, as the autopsy report claimed, was a contributory cause, frequent drug tests like the ones the company dropped would have at least alerted the company of a problem. Whether it could have saved his life is at best speculative. Whether it's the company's job to save lives of its performers is even a point that can be debated. McMahon in the article claimed the WWF is cleaner than anything else in the entertainment industry, which is clearly a joke. With the possible exception of rock stars, who also have a high preponderance of drug deaths, and race car drivers, and not mentioning pro bodybuilders whose death rate may very well be as high or higher, whose deaths are rarely drug-related. I've never seen a study of them indicating the death rates in those professions is at the same level as with pro wrestlers. The WWF can say it hasn't had a drug death since Pillman more than 2 years ago, but it has had numerous wrestlers go into rehab, a much higher percentage than most entertainment fields considering the relatively small size of its roster. Over the past few years, clearly the track record for WCW, with 3 drug overdose deaths, is far worse, and McMahon in no way should be held responsible for problems in WCW. But the fact is Spicoli's drug problems worsened while working for the WWF, and he nearly died while working there. A slew of the wrestlers who died young spent much of their careers working in the WWF. Wrestlers who have been in all 3 major dressing rooms indicate problems are not specific company problems, but overall industry problems. It's doubtful one would find in any entertainment form that has approximately only 200 total full-time major league performers in the country, or even taking rock stars and race car drivers and dividing the number down to the equivalent statistically of what a normal group of 200 would break down to, with even half the number of deaths per capita per year as pro wrestling. And even if you could, that would only indicate a problem in those entertainment professions, and not a justification that pro wrestling doesn't have a problem. McMahon in the article claimed we've got zero to hide here, but his company and WCW's avoidance of the state of Oregon, the only statement that requires an annual drug screening, is a contradiction of that statement. Oregon doesn't require steroids to be screened for, so realistically the steroid issue in any argument for staying out of Oregon, which neither company can publicly say either since use, not truly discouraged, is illegal, is a false argument to begin with. WCW claimed random testing in that anyone who tests positive is counseled, and then tested again in 30 days. Among the wrestlers, the WCW drug policy has always been considered a joke, and few if any in the industry take it seriously. Wrestlers are on occasion tested. While management strongly denies this, among the wrestlers, the belief is that the big stars in the right cliques seem to have a free pass. Sean Waltman in the right clique during his WCW days, and eventually losing his job for being in the wrong clique on the wrong day, being friends with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, for example, even with an admitted history of drug problems coming from the WWF, was never tested once in his entire 18-month stint in WCW. Wrestlers have been flagged for steroids and other drugs and reprimanded, but even with repeated failures, rarely suspended and none in recent times. During the peak of WWF drug testing, the wrestlers considered certain statements regarding the testing, such as the ability to test for HGH as claimed or claiming tests were unbeatable when the belief was low levels of testosterone could be used and still come out negative, to be dishonest, and there were occasional complaints about unequal enforcement and questions about how McMahon, in the eyes of wrestlers, seemingly allowed certain people to slip through. Sid Eudy in 1992 was the name often mentioned in the early days of the testing, and it later came out that he both used others' urine for testing at one point and later did test positive, both of which he has admitted in interviews in the past, right before his WrestleMania main event with Hulk Hogan, but the program was never considered by the wrestlers overall as a joke. Due to the expected publicity stemming from when this story would be released and other factors including 3 drug-related deaths among its wrestlers over the past 2 years, WCW is planning on having a drug education and counseling program for its wrestlers in the spring. A final story on March 3 concerned the lack of regulation of the industry, using the death of Gary Albright as an example. Considering Albright's death was from a heart attack caused partially from an enlarged heart and blockages of several coronary arteries, this problem would have likely been picked up if Pennsylvania, or All Japan Pro Wrestling for that matter, required an EKG of its performers, which few states require. Pennsylvania scrapped all serious wrestling regulation in 1989. McMahon claimed in the article that if his wrestlers are regulated, so should the Harlem Globetrotters, which is actually as perfect a sporting analogy to pro wrestling as there is. Again, the argument becomes, by all fairness, the rules should be the same for both, or, because of the high death rate of young wrestlers as compared to young members of the Globetrotters, perhaps in all fairness the analogy isn't valid at all. If wrestling companies cleaned up their act, there would be no need whatsoever for governmental regulation. Whether, even with a dirty act, governmental regulation is actually a benefit, is debatable at best. Wade Keller of Pro Wrestling Torch said in the story that he's noted the mental deterioration in several of his wrestling friends due to repeated concussions. This is a theme often noticed among many people within the business or close to it that deal with a lot of wrestlers, particularly those who either take repeated hard unprotected shots to the head, or start developing problems with painkillers. Tim Lukenhoff, an administrator of the Missouri Office of Athletics, said regarding regulation in the Daily News, "If you become too restrictive on these people, they may not come back and hold matches in your state." He also claimed costs of drug testing could put smaller promoters out of business. The only state that has any drug testing, Oregon, which requires a drug screening for an annual license, currently has no shortage of independent wrestling. That hasn't always been the case over the past decade when the laws on the books were actually enforced. But the drug screening, for cocaine, marijuana and speed as well as an HIV test, isn't even a financial issue when it comes to promoting in Oregon. The wrestlers pay for the screening themselves, usually at a cost of $60 to $80, hardly major financial hardship, once per year. Nevertheless, major promotions steer clear of the state for reasons nobody will publicly say but are generally understood throughout the industry, that no company is going to let its talent undergo testing unless they are the ones who control the results and choose who and how to punish and ignore punishing in the event of failing. But whatever claims of steering clear of Oregon being due to financial issues are a smoke screen. The only case where commission regulation has kept a promotion out appears to be the local commission in Edmonton in regard to Stampede Wrestling, where, due to the small crowds the promotion draws, it has pulled out of the city because drawing such small crowds it can't afford the $250 per show fee for the commission-required physician at the show. The third part of the series on March 6 dealt with a few teenage fans' passion for pro wrestling, and the question is how far is too far? Wasn't really examined well because it's a difficult issue to examine in a short article. It was simply criticism from Bret Hart and Bruno Sammartino with no new ground broken, notes about the character of the Godfather, Miss Kitty taking off her top at the December pay-per-view use of blood, the Lenny and Lodi characters on WCW, and the Mae Young angle. It talked about the current case in Pembroke Park, Florida with a 12-year-old who beat up a 6-year-old using wrestling moves, not mentioning there have been probably a half-dozen similar stories over the past year. The WWF's respondent was Lisa Moretti, Ivory, who said her initial reaction to doing storylines where she winds up in her underwear is humiliation, but when she watches it on TV, she gets a kick out of it. It mentioned the PTC controversy, including a quote from Steve Schwain, the group's operating director, who said, "We are definitely considering re-upping our campaign because they've degenerated to an atrocious level in recent weeks." Moretti said she felt WWF TV was okay for kids to watch with their parents and saw no problem with teenagers watching. The Brazilians, including 2 members of the Gracie family, dominated the World Submission Championships in Abu Dhabi from March 1 to March 3. The show was marred with complaints about bad rules and inconsistent scoring. In particular, the positioning points penalized anyone who came close but didn't get leg locks, because simply good positioning like a side mount with no attempt at a submission was more valuable than coming close to many submissions, which resulted in virtually every Japanese fighter, including those who were more aggressive with submissions, losing via points in the first round. They also continued a controversial rule where in the first 5 minutes, no points would be counted, with the idea that it would encourage nothing but going for submissions during that time period. But the result was that it resulted in fighters, particularly the wrestlers, stalling for the first 5 minutes knowing none of their takedowns would count. At one point, almost like watching a WWF pay-per-view event when Vince McMahon was playing heel owner, in the Tito Ortiz vs. Ricardo Arona semifinal at 215, Ortiz was using a can-opener-type necklock, which was ruled legal before the tournament and allowed up to that point. When midway through the match the rule was changed and they were given the word it was illegal. There were also complaints about matches where friends would face each other and do almost spectacular pro wrestling and going for added cash prizes for quickest submission and best throw. In fact, Renzo Gracie's 5-second guillotine choke tap out, which got the prize for quickest submission, was questioned by nearly everyone there, as was regular training partners Matt Hughes and Jeremy Horn, who had a nearly as quick a submission win for Hughes, 16 seconds, right after a spectacular suplex which got the prize for best move. The big winner was Mark Kerr, who repeated his 1999 success by winning both the heavyweight and open division championships. Kerr remains undefeated in both MMA competition and pure submission competition. Kerr did score 2 submissions in the tournament and only once was in trouble, when his much smaller first-round opponent in the absolute division, Leo Vieira, got him with a flying armbar that only his super strength enabled him to get out of. Except for Kerr, it was a complete sweep by the Brazilians, while the Japanese ended up empty-handed with virtually all not making it out of the first round, although that was blamed on rules that penalized them in going for leglocks. There were no submissions on the final day, which means the new point system determined the champions. At 65 kilograms, 143, Royler Gracie, the 1999 champion, beat Alexander Soka, the 1998 champion. At 76 kilos, 167, Renzo Gracie, the 1998 champion, beat Jean-Jacques Machado, the 1999 champion. Both Gracie winners looked impressive and were aggressively going for submissions throughout, aside from the question of Renzo's early fight. At 87 kilos, 191, Saulo Ribeiro, who is expected to debut in Japan on the May 26 Coliseum 2000 Tokyo Dome show, beat Ricardo Liborio in a battle of Brazilians. At 98 kilos, 215, Ricardo Arona beat 1999 champ Jeff Monson of the United States. We're told the most impressive in that weight class was actually Tito Ortiz, who finished third, losing in a controversial overtime match in the semis to Arona, a decision heavily booed. In the heavyweight division, Kerr beat 1998 champ Rico Rodriguez in a battle of training partners by an 8-1 score. In the absolute division, Kerr beat Sean Alvarez by a 1-0 score in the finals. Mario Sperry won the super fight over Roberto Travan in a battle of Brazilians that was said to be one of the most boring fights anyone had ever seen, as they locked up in a pro wrestling collar and elbow and neither made an attempt to take the other down or go for a submission the entire match. Results of major names from the mixed martial arts world. 143, Royler Gracie scored wins over Barrett Yoshida, Jiro Wakabayashi, Joao Roque and Soka to win the division. 167, Renzo Gracie scored wins over American Dennis Hallman, Israel Albuquerque, Marcio Fitosa, the controversial 5-second win, and Machado. Lions Den fighter Mikey Burnett, who has retired from MMA to pursue a career as a pro boxer, beat Kohei Yasumi in the first round before losing to Machado via tap-out as Machado dominated him. Rumino Sato, the superstar of the Japanese Shudo organization, lost in the first round to Vitor Ribeiro of Brazil 4-1. Another Shudo fighter, Kaoru Uno, lost in the first round to Fitosa 2-1. Hayato Sakurai of Shudo, who is ranked as one of the top lightweights in MMA, lost to Albuquerque in the first round by a 4-0 score. 191, Jerry Bullender of Lions Den lost to Ribeiro in the first round 2-0. Dave Mena won his first round match over Izuru Takeuchi but fell to Ribeiro in the second round. Egan Inoue beat Emil Kachatrian in the first round but lost in the second round by Jorge Patino of Brazil 6-0. Patino, who lost to Pat Militic for the UFC lightweight title last year, beat Carl Weber in the first round and Inoue before losing to Liborio. 215, Matt Hughes, a top-level amateur wrestler, who actually fought at 170 in UFC and came for the 191 division, but had to fight here due to an administrative error, was very impressive, giving up a lot of weight and finishing fourth overall. He beat Ricardo Almeida in the first round and Jeremy Horn, a UFC veteran and well-known MMA fighter, in the second round with an immediate high suplex and guillotine choke before losing in the semifinals to Monson. Hiromitsu Kanehara of Rings, the only person in any of the weight classes with a pro wrestling background coming from the old UWFI, in the tournament, lost to Arona in the first round by a 16-0 score. Mike Van Arsdale, a former many-time national champion wrestler who was impressive in UFC and Brazilian fights, beat former world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Murillo Bustamante via decision, in the highest-profile first-round match of the entire tournament before losing to another well-known MMA star, Tito Ortiz, in the second round via a knee-bar submission in 5:48. Ortiz beat Rostislav Borisenko with an entangled arm lock and Van Arsdale before losing to eventual champion Arona in the semifinals by decision at 15 minutes. Ortiz ended up beating Hughes 4-2 for third place. Heavyweight Kerr scored successive wins over Josh Barnett, best known for beating Dan Severn with an armbar a few weeks ago, in the first round via submission in 9:33, Anthony Netzler in the second round via submission in 4:20, Regan Machado in the semifinals by a 2-1 score and Rodriguez in the finals. Pete Williams of Lions Den beat former early UFC fighter Remco Perdol in the first round 1-0 before losing to Machado 7-0 in the second round. Rodrigo Nogueira, coming off going to the Final Four in the Rings tournament, beat another former Rings fighter, Sean Alvarez in the first round 1-0 in overtime before losing to Rodriguez by submission in 3:02. Carlos Barreto, a big name in Brazilian Vale Tudo who has fought in UFC and Pride, lost to Rodriguez in the first round by a 1-0 score. Ricardo Moraes, the giant Brazilian, beat Carlos Clayton in the first round 6-0 and Mark Robinson in the second round by submission in 12:58 before being injured and forfeiting both his next round to Rodriguez and a chance at third. Lee Hasdell of England, who got the ring spot when Yoshihisa Yamamoto withdrew due to a high fever, lost to Robinson in the first round. Absolute Curse survived the early scare to beat Leo Vieira 1-0, Van Arsdale by decision, Ricardo Almeida by a 3-0 score and Alvarez by a 1-0 score to win the tournament. Van Arsdale won his first round match. In a huge size discrepancy, Sato, at 150 pounds, challenged Ortiz at 215, and was aggressive as hell, going for one submission after another, but the size difference was too much and Ortiz choked him out in 8-19. Alvarez beat Barreto in his first round match, then made Rodriguez submit in 9-01 in the second round and beat an already injured Ortiz 2-0 in the semifinals. Ortiz, due to a shoulder injury, didn't come out for his third-place match, which went to Almeida. The bracketing for the third Super J Cup was announced on March 6. The first round matches, which will take place on April 1 in Sendai, will be Jushin Liger vs Tiger Mask, the winner of the March 12 Battle Arts tournament. The most likely candidate for this slot would be Minoru Tanaka vs Men's Teo. The Big Japan rep, Shinya Makabe vs Gran Hamada. Riki Fuji vs Sasuke the Great. Masao Orihara, Great Sasuke vs Kaz Hayashi, who formerly worked for Michinoku Pro as Shiryu, so these two have a background working with each other. Naoki Sano vs Magnum Tokyo, Onryo vs Curry Man, Christopher Daniels, and Shima vs Ricky Marvin. The tournament continues with the brackets of the Liger Tiger Mask winner versus the Battle Arts Teo winner, etc., with the final 8 matches at Tokyo Sumo Hall on April 9. One would think it would be for Sumo Hall, Liger vs Tanaka if it is him in this, Hamada vs Fuji, Sasuke vs probably Sano ahead of Tokyo, but that could go either way, and Curry Man vs Shima. At that point you've got to figure a Final Four with Liger vs Hamada as a likely choice, although I could see having Tanaka upset Liger because you've got to use this thing to create a new star, and the two best candidates for that star making are Shima and Tanaka, and Sasuke vs Shima. From there I'd pick Shima with the upset if Liger is still around for that same reason, and Liger in the finals because you pretty well need either Liger or Sasuke in the finals. If Tanaka beats Liger in the upset, then Sasuke for that reason has to beat Shima. Although the ending numbers were basically the same as last week, there was a difference in how they got there. Raw on March 6 did a 6.44 rating, 5.88 first hour, 6.95 seconds hour, and a 10.0 share. Nitro did a 2.72 rating, 2.98 first hour, 2.49 seconds hour, and a 4.0 share. The combined audience during the competitive hour was 9.7 million. The difference was last week, Raw actually drew a bigger number in the competitive hour, and there was, statistically speaking, nobody that switched over when Nitro ended. This week, approximately 48% of the Nitro audience switched to Raw when the show was over, about double the previous high. The Raw main event was Rock vs Benoit in a cage match, drew a 6.80 final quarter and a 7.25 overrun. The Nitro main event of Vampiro and Sid vs Wall and Jarrett drew a 2.79 rating. But the star of the evening was the Triple H vs Rikishi match at 7.20 for the entire match. Head-to-head quarters saw Raw at 5.74, Shane Show, Triple H, Stephanie Open and Crash Holly in Hotel Room, to 2.44, Flair vs Hennig, Raw at 5.75, Kane vs Show, Devon vs Henry, to 2.26, Smiley vs Lane and Abbott interview, Raw at 6.01, Too Cool vs Dog and X-Pac, to 2.48, Hogan interview and Kidman and Booker vs New Heat, and Raw at 5.89, Angle vs Jericho, to 2.66, Rhodes Funk Angle. WWF weekend numbers for March 5th through the 6th saw Livewire at 1.3, beating out ECW for the lowest rated spot by 0.04, Superstars at 2.0, Heat at 3.74. WCW Saturday Night did a 1.4 rating. SmackDown on March 2nd drew a 4.65 rating, a 7.2 share. The rating was slightly down from what the show has averaged in recent weeks, but it still beat its usual 7.0 share, indicating the decline was more due to less people watching television overall on the night. NBC was in rerun programming, which theoretically should have helped the rating. The March 1st Thunder dropped to a new low, a 1.93 rating and a 3.0 share. This breaks the mark set just 1 week earlier of a 2.03 as the lowest unopposed episode of the show in its regular time slot. While last week had the very legitimate excuse of going head-to-head with both the Grammys and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, this week didn't have that double dose of ratings grabbers to contend with. The only sort of bright spot was a 2.23 for Luger vs. Vampiro. The low point was the post-match angle with Crowbar and the beginning of Flair vs. Bagwell at 1.81. ECW on TNN on March 3 drew its all-time record rating with a 1.28 rating and 2.3 share. Japanese television rundown. February 12, New Japan. 1. Akira pinned Hiro Saito in 7:24. This entire show was the final battle with Team 2000 versus NWO Japan, leading to NWO Japan joining Team 2000, since they lost 3 of the 4 matches. Akira is the most underrated wrestler in the company and both men went all out here. Saito even missed a tope and crashed into the guardrail. Finish saw Akira get the pin after a missile dropkick and splash off the top. Heat was disappointing but they couldn't have done more. 3.5 stars. 2. Scott Norton pinned Super J in 8:18 after a power bomb. As you can imagine, this was bad. Dud. 3. Don Fry beat Satoshi Kojima in 10:22 after a few punches and a sleeper. Really clumsy. Fry was effective doing the UFC fighter role and just the limited believable stuff. Now he's branching out to doing straight pro wrestling and he's becoming just a green pro wrestler. Kojima really couldn't even carry him because he's out of his element. 1/2 star. 4. Masahiro Chono beat Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 18:14. Long boring match. Chono is physically shot and Tenzan had to do most everything. Both guys bled hard way. The only good thing to say about this is Chono's high kick still looks good and the finish was strong, which almost saved the match. Chono took a mountain bomb off the top rope but Tenzan missed a diving headbutt. Chono tried the double arm lock. Tenzan got out but Chono blocked a spinning heel kick and went into the SDF for the tap out. 1.5 stars. February 13, All Japan. 1. Vader and Steve Williams beat Yoshihiro Takayama and Takao Mori in 8:02 to earn a tag title shot. This was Vader and Williams' debut as a team in the old Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen role. Suffice to say they aren't Brody and Hansen. A little clumsy as you'd expect but not too bad. Williams pinned Takayama with a back suplex. 1.5 stars. 2. Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama beat Stan Hansen and Johnny Smith in 2040. The second half only aired. Hansen was moving really slow. Kobashi and Akiyama could only do so much here and they weren't at their best either. 2 stars. February 19, New Japan. 1. Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa beat Kendo Kashin and Dr. Wagner Jr. in 16:23. Typical fast-paced good junior heavyweight match but the crowd was quiet. The second half aired on TV ending with Otani pinning Wagner after a spider bomb. 3.5 stars. 2. Genichiro Tenryu and Shiro Koshinaka beat Kensuke Sasaki and Kenzo Suzuki and when Tenryu pinned Suzuki after a clothesline. Tenryu and Sasaki beat the hell out of each other with chops. Match was bad when Suzuki was in. His role was basically to have Tenryu beat the hell out of him but his comebacks looked weak. 2 stars. 3. Jushin Liger retained the IWGP Junior title beating Minoru Tanaka in 5:04. It was very good while it lasted but simply too short. Fans weren't even close to ready for a finish when it happened and Tanaka wasn't given ample time to show his stuff. 2.25 stars. 4. Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi beat Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto in 15:43. New Japan has really gone downhill with this as a main event because it wouldn't even be anything special as an opening match in the old days. Nagata pinned Ohara with a bridging back suplex. 2.25 stars. February 20, All Japan. 1. Vader pinned Toshiaki Kawada in their first ever singles match in 13:44. Because of his weight, Vader couldn't work the pace he's done in the past, and was almost physically reminiscent of former British star Big Daddy. Obviously his work was 1,000 times better. They clicked real well because Vader did a great job selling Kawada's offense. Bout ended when Vader got the pin after a clothesline. 3.75 stars. 2. Kobashi pinned Williams in 24:37. This match was heavily edited for TV so only 6 minutes aired. It's unfair to judge it but even in edited form it was clear it was Williams' best match in years. He even did a tope and pulled out everything. Closing moments that aired were great wrestling with great heat. After Williams got several near falls, including one with a dragon suplex that folded Kobashi in half, Kobashi hit the desperation lariat to win and earn a title match with Vader. February 26, New Japan. 1. Nagata beat Suzuki with an armbar in 8:52. Suzuki just took a beating. Nagata just beat him up and Suzuki looked terrible here. Most of the New Japan rookies you can see a lot of promise in from the start. Suzuki, because of his size, looks to be someone who will be pushed heavy in a few years, but he's not even close to the level Nakanishi was when he started. Nagata ordered Suzuki to fire back with some slaps after the match and they then hugged. Dud. 2. Shinya Hashimoto and Takashi Iizuka beat Chono and Akira in 10:44 when Hashimoto beat Akira via submission with an armbar. Because Hashimoto and Iizuka are doing the legit routine, most of the match was on the mat trading holds. It was still a decent bout. 2 stars. 3. Sasaki retained the IWGP Heavyweight title pinning Fry in 14:02. It started slow but the crowd picked up. Fry actually did a Kurt Hennig-style job for some leg kicks. The idea was Sasaki took out Fry's legs and he couldn't move, so he was a sitting target for Sasaki's lariats. Sasaki took over and delivered a lariat, a rabbit lariat and a third lariat while Fry's mobility was shot. Fry kicked out, but then Sasaki delivered a fourth lariat for the pin. It wasn't bad considering the risk of putting Fry in a match for that long and that Sasaki isn't exactly the best worker in the company at carrying someone. 2.5 stars. February 27, All Japan. 1. Kobashi pinned Vader in 1949 to win the Triple Crown. It started slow. Vader's weight was noticeably working against him here as he was close to sucking and had to keep the pace slow. But he still had a really good match. It looked like he was more than 400 and the bloating only made him look older. Kobashi came in with his ribs taped so Vader, and after them including dropping his stomach on the guardrail and ripping the tape off. Vader did 3 of his reverse splashes, Vader bombs, for a near fall. Kobashi did a plancha. Vader went up for another reverse splash but Kobashi got up and power bombed him. They traded German suplexes for near falls and Vader hit a second German for another near fall. After the double lariat spot, Vader hit 2 choke slams for near falls. Kobashi hit his trademark desperation lariat but Vader kicked out. Kobashi then delivered a moonsault and went for a lariat, but Vader bodyblocked him. Kobashi delivered another lariat and got the pin. The place went nuts for the finish. 3 3/4, 2. Misawa beat Taue in 15:18. Misawa carried the match selling most of the way. Taue is washed up and Misawa physically is nowhere near what he once was, but Misawa had his working shoes on. Misawa used an elbow suicida and rolling body block off the apron. Taue used several high kicks including one off the apron and teased a choke slam off the apron but ended up delivering back body drop. Misawa came back with a rolling elbow and a running elbow for the pin. 3.5 stars. Mexico. The March 3rd Arena Mexico show probably didn't draw well since it was sandwiched between major shows the week before and the 2 shows of the year on March 10th with the return of Perro Aguayo. But this now won't be his retirement match. The long-awaited Atlantis vs Villano Tercero Mask vs Mask match on March 17th will be the first EMLL show to air live on pay-per-view in Mexico through Sky TV. All the advertising states that the entire March 17th show won't air on television and can only be seen live or on pay-per-view. Because of it being a pay-per-view, they're keeping Aguayo's career going as the semifinal will be Aguayo and Tarzan Boy and Negro Casas vs Shocker and Scorpio Jr. and Mascara Anno 2000, and the newspaper ads out for the show are not advertising this as Aguayo's retirement match either. Aguayo's first match at Arena Mexico in years on March 3rd will be teaming with Mr. Niebla and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. at Atlantis against Villano Tercero and Bestia Salvaje and Shocker and Scorpio Jr. So they are using the huge crowd they are sure to get for the Aguayo match and putting Atlantis and V3 in there to shoot the big angle in the match that everyone came to see. They continue to heat the ladder match in the main event where Atlantis and Tarzan Boy and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. beat Cien Caras and Bestia Salvaje and El Satanico via DQ when all the Villanos and Pierroth hit the ring to attack Atlantis. In the semi, where La Furia Bariquas, Pierroth Jr. and Gran Marcos Jr. and Villano Tercero beat Los Capos, Apollo Dantes and Mascara Anno 2000 and Universo 2000, it was to build the Mascara Anno 2000 vs Pierroth Jr. hair match for March 10th as they had a wild brawl ending with both bleeding buckets. AAA ran its biggest show of the year on March 5th at El Toreo de Cuatro Caminos, the famous arena that the UA ran twice a week in the early 80s heyday and at one point was the hottest arena for pro wrestling in the world as at its peak 1 million fans attended wrestling at that arena annually, as compared to maybe 2.2 million fans that attended all 200 plus WWF events during 1999 for a comparison. The show had a huge advance and drew a sellout of 18,000 for an outdoor show with temperatures in the 40s and in the middle of a rainstorm. The main event was a major rip-off as they advertised La Parka Jr. vs. El Hijo del Espectro in a mask vs. mask main event. After more than 10,000 tickets were sold in advance, Antonio Pena announced that Espectro was in poor health, you know what that means, and an unknown wrestler called Draco 2 was brought in, lost, and unmasked, revealing Victor Hugo, 32. The posters all over town had Espectro's name on top. This same El Hijo del Espectro was supposed to lost his mask on the first Ocesa show and no show that card, so they had to bring Guerrero del Futuro back to lose. Fans heavily pelted the ring with garbage for both the mask and post-match. The finals of the annual Rey de Reyes, King of Kings tournament came down to El Alabrie, Charlie Manson, Cibernetico and Abismo Negro. Cibernetico and Abismo were the last two, and when Tiger Steel attacked both men, Chirantes missed the attack on Cibernetico but saw the attack on Abismo, so he DQ'd Cibernetico and Abismo won the tournament. Abismo, Cibernetico and Electroshock joined forces to clean house on Tiger Steel as the fans chanted Mexico against the foreigner. At the end, even Antonio Pena threw a punch at Steel. In the women's hair at stake, Pentagon, seconded by Xochitl Hamada, beat Oriental, seconded by Sister Rossi Moreno. Rossi hit her brother with a chair when Pentagon moved, and Pentagon quickly got a submission, costing Rossi her hair. With La Parka Jr. advertised as the main event in nearby Naucalpan, EMLL the same day at Arena Coliseo brought back the original La Parka from WCW for his first ever Mexico City singles match against Pierroth Jr. since their big mask match last year in Nuevo Laredo, with Pierroth DQ'd for using a foreign object. Also in Naucalpan that same day, Fantasy and Star Boy from the IWRG tag titles beating Toriuman Susumu Mochizuki and Yasushi Kanda. The trio of Shocker and Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje has switched their names from Los Tres Bestias to Los Guapos. The wrestler Tamba the Flying Elephant, also known as Abdullah Tamba because he looks so much like a shorter and far more agile version of Abdullah the Butcher, then again, who wasn't more agile than Butcher, is in rough shape and on public assistance living in Juarez suffering from diabetes. Tamba was a big star in the early 80s as a short fat guy who would do all the flying moves. On March 3rd in Tijuana, the main event saw Rey Mysterio Sr. and Halloween and Damian over Nicho El Millonario, WCW Psicosis, and El Hijo del Santo and Brazo de Plata. Nicho used a stapler on Mysterio Sr. who bladed right away. The finish saw Rey Mysterio Jr. come out and handcuff Rey Sr. to the ropes. Before Nicho could attack Rey Sr., Damian gave him a low blow and pinned Nicho. The heels then all attacked Nicho. Rey Sr. got out of the handcuffs and put them on Nicho and beat on him. It was said to be a great show with super heat for the main event. Pete Lothario, the son of Texas wrestling legend Jose Lothario, is resting in the Mexico City area on small shows. All Japan. About the only news is that on the March 11th Korakuen Hall show they announced the Tamon Honda and Masao Inoue vs. Muhammad Yone and Daisuke Ikeda from Battle Arts match will be for the All-Asian Tag Team titles. The belief right now is that there will be no change in the company until after the Champion Carnival Tour ends. After that point, there is still talk of some wrestlers leaving. Because of his win in Brawl for All in WWF giving him a legit rep for Japan, the Rikitos and Old Boys Committee tried to get Mike Barton in the main event tag team match for the March 11th Yokohama Arena show as Genichiro Tenryu's partner against Shinya Hashimoto and Naoya Ogawa, but All Japan turned them down. New Japan. 7 matches were announced at a press conference for the April 7th Tokyo Dome show, which at this point looks to be a tough sell since there's nothing of any drawing power aside from the main event of Shinya Hashimoto vs. Naoya Ogawa. Ogawa is trying to build it up by saying the Hashimoto, who is planning on taking the March tour off to lose 10 more pounds for the match, should win the IWGP title from Kensuke Sasaki because he wants it IWGP vs. NWA title unification. Other matches announced were Takashi Iizuka vs. Kazunari Murakami, Tatsumi Fujinami and Genichiro Tenryu vs. Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi, which will probably be an IWGP Tag Team title match, an IWGP Heavyweight title match with Kensuke Sasaki vs. Jushin Liger, which I believe will be the first time in history that the Junior Heavyweight champ has ever gotten a heavyweight title shot, plus 2 more Junior Heavyweight vs. Heavyweight matches with Don Frye vs. Koji Kanemoto and Satoshi Kojima vs. Shinjiro Otani, and the return of Yutaka Yoshi vs. Hiroyoshi Tenzan. Keiji Muto wasn't announced as they shot an angle this week in which Muto signed with WCW to do the Great Muta gimmick. The idea is that Masahiro Chono got all of Muto's guys to join Team 2000 while he was injured, So Muto is going to bring back his own team of Americans from WCW that aren't on Nitro so New Japan can use them for complete tours, which is why they were scouting the power plant guys and the guys that have been working Nashville to bring in a few Americans they can make minor stars here, similar to Super J or Brian Johnston on Great Muta's team. The idea is that Muta and his team will be from WCW, and not New Japan, and they'll attempt to get Muta to work a few TV tapings in WCW to give credibility to their angle, kind of like ECW with Mr. Monday Night, but actually getting him to work on Mondays to make the gimmick make sense. They shot photos for press purposes of Muto signing a WCW contract using J.J. Dillon and Paul Orndorff as the WCW Board of Governors. Masa Saito also came to try and book Goldberg for April 7th, but it doesn't look like he'll be ready for the show. They had a poll in Japan on who from WCW they should bring to the big show, and the top two were Goldberg and Bret Hart, but Hart also won't be ready and his WCW contract doesn't allow them to book him to New Japan, so if New Japan wants him they have to book him on their own, and the feeling is he'll want the kind of money New Japan used to pay Hogan, and they don't think he's worth $100,000 plus for one dome match. Yoshi, who had done some wrestling in Europe and has been training in Calgary with Joe Daigo, returns on the show. Perro Aguayo had his final match in Japan on March 6 at Korakuen Hall before only 1,545, teaming with his son and Dr. Wagner Jr. to beat Jushin Liger and Gran Hamada and Negro Casas in 1822. After the match, Aguayo and Hamada, who have been rivals going back some 20 years dating back to the old WWF light heavyweight title days, hugged and cried in the ring together. That show was the 28th anniversary of the debut of New Japan Pro Wrestling, which ran its first show on March 6, 1972 with main event Antonio Inoki vs. Karl Gotch. They brought out a birthday cake and Tatsumi Fujinami announced officially that they would return to the Fukuoka Dome on May 5, presumably with a Riki Choshu vs. Atsushi Onita explosive barbed wire match, saying his announcement was the company birthday present. The day after the announcement of the Dome show, Onita had a meeting away from the office with a top New Japan official, so that seems to coincide with the theory. They'll need something big for that show, and more than just that, since Fukuoka Dome was always a tough draw, and nothing they are doing now is looking to build for being that big, so they've got to do an angle involving outside talent. Fujinami and Osamu Kito are the only wrestlers left who appeared on that first ever New Japan show. They also brought a birthday cake out, and guess what? Nobody got the cake in their face. The new tour opened March 3rd in Niigata before a sellout 3,800 and March 4th in Hiratsuka before a sellout 4,200. It was just the typical fare, with the exception of it being the Japanese retirement tour for Aguayo, who finishes up this week in Japan before his final match at Arena Mexico. In a February 3rd fall Mexican-style match, Aguayo and Aguayo Jr. and Kanemoto and Otani and Casas beat Liger and Hamada and Samurai and Kendo Kashin and Wagner Jr. when Otani pinned Wagner in the third fall at 1927. The fans popped big when Aguayo and Aguayo Jr. did a double tope. Mike Enos looks to be getting a push as a regular. Before he went to WCW, and during some tours while with WCW, he always did well here because he's an underrated worker, and his lack of charisma that hurts him in the US isn't as big a deal in a serious work promotion. On the March 4th show in Hiratsuka, he and Yuji Nagata beat former tag champs Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto, with Enos pinning Ohara. February 26 TV did a 3.2 rating. Other Japan notes. The merger of DirecTV and Sky Perfect TV in Japan was made official on March 2nd. What that means to pro wrestling is uncertain. DirecTV, which was the weaker of the two, had just 1 week earlier signed a contract with Pancrase where they would broadcast every Pancrase show as a pay-per-view. A correction from last week's report on the Rings show. The Kiyoshi Tamura vs. Henzo Gracie was actually 2 rounds, not 3 rounds, with Tamura getting the decision. We'll have a complete report on the show next week, but in brief, the judging was really bad and totally inconsistent. The matches themselves were very competitive and it was an excellent shoot show. In brief on the judging. 1. Renato Babalu vs. Ilyakine Mikhail was ruled a draw by all 3 judges and sent into overtime. I had the first round 9-7 for Babalu, since he lost a point on a yellow card for throwing Mikhail over the top rope, but scored 2 knockdowns, which in the 10-point must-scoring system they use would be a 10-7 round. Babalu also dominated the second round, even taking 1 point away because Babalu had more than 10 kilograms in weight edge. That's still 18-16. Didn't matter, he got robbed because he won, 40 into overtime. 2. Dan Henderson scored a big win over Gilbert Yvel. Henderson fought a super fight. Yvel got called for a 3-point foul in the first round, plus Henderson won the round fairly impressively, so, being as nice to Yvel as possible, it's still 10-6. Henderson also won the second round 10-9, making it 20-15, not even giving Henderson another point, 20-14, because Yvel had the more than 10 kilogram weight edge. In the scoring, it didn't specifically state the weight edge is worth 1 point in a fight, but did say it should be taken into consideration, so for consistency, I'd give it 1 point every fight where there was a large weight discrepancy. 3. Antonio Nogueira beat Andrei Kopylov with 2 judges ruling it a draw and Nogueira getting the third by 1 point, so he advanced. I don't know what fight the judges were watching because Nogueira easily won both rounds, plus was giving up 33 pounds, so it should have been 20-18 even not taking the weight in, and I scored it 20-17. 4. Kiyoshi Tamura beat Renzo Gracie. This was a competitive close fight with the first round even and Tamura getting a 10-9 seconds round for 20-19 overall since the weight difference was less than 10 kilograms. All 3 judges voted at 20-19 for Tamura. 5. In the semis, it was a total robbery in Nogueira versus Henderson. Nogueira won both rounds clearly, and giving Henderson the point for giving up weight should have made it 20-19. Instead, all 3 judges called it a draw. Nogueira then won the overtime, which was competitive, but he was on top most of the way, and the judges gave it to Henderson. 6. Tamura versus Babalu was far more competitive than the previous fight. I was shocked here because Tamura was the hometown hero. Babalu won the first round but Tamura won the second, so that's 19-19 and Tamura was giving up weight, so he should have won the decision. Instead they gave it to Babalu. 7. Henderson versus Babalu for the money was a clean call. The first round was even but Henderson won second round, plus he was giving up the weight, so I'd scored 20-18 for Henderson. Great Sasuke had his 10th anniversary show on March 1st in Nagoya before 674 fans. Sasuke made his pro debut under the name Masa Michinoku on March 1, 1990 wrestling Monkey Magic Wakita, now Super Delphin, and took the Sasuke name in Mexico in 1992. Michinoku Pro Wrestling started in March 1993 and he made his name nationally by going to the finals in the first J Cup and being the only wrestler in history to do 3 4.5+ matches on the same show, beating El Samurai and Jushin Liger before losing to Chris Benoit in the finals at Tokyo Sumo Hall. Big Japan started its tournament to determine its rep for the Super J Cup in April with 2 matches on February 29 where Masayoshi Motegi beat Fantastique and Men's Teo beat Guerrero del Futuro in the finals on March 2 in Kawasaki, with Teo winning over Motegi and earning the 14th spot in the 16-man tournament. They also had an interpromotional match to main event the March 2 show with FMW's Kentaro Kanemura and Gedo and Jado beating Ryuji Yamakawa and Shinya Kojika, subbing for Tomoaki Honma, who is out with a knee injury, and Winger. Kojika, who is the group's owner and is now 57, hasn't wrestled in 4 months and his offense consisted of mainly using an iron claw. Gedo and Jado before the match went to Kojika in the ring saying they wanted to be paid in advance as a way to build heat. FMW has a major show on May 3rd at Hakata Star Lanes, which may wind up being an ECW TV taping as well. Battle Arts is running March 25th in Sapporo with Minoru Tanaka defending the independent junior title against Ikuto Hidaka. Nani Takahashi is the new AJW Japanese champion, winning a 4-woman tournament on March 1st in Hakata Star Lanes, beating Miyuki Fuji in the finals. They ran their first major show of the year on March 2nd at Yokohama Bunka Gym, claiming a sellout of 5,600. The place doesn't even hold that many, and AJW at this stage of the game with this show can't sell it out. Main event was an over-the-top rules cage match with Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda over Kumiko Maikawa and Tomoko Watanabe in 23:55. The semi was a US-style angle with Yumiko Hata and Takako Inoue and Commando Boyoshoi versus Kaoru Ito and Manami Toyota and Dynamite Kansai. The idea was if Hata won, she would be the matchmaker for the March 11th and March 12th Korakuen Hall shows. If Toyota's team won, then the JWP promotion, which Hata is supposed to hate, would make the matches for both shows. Hata pinned Toyota with her favorite pyramid driver for the win. Here and there. We have a few more details on the death of Elizabeth Chase, 45, who had wrestled dating back to the late 70s. She passed away on February 26 in Costa Rica, apparently while undergoing liposuction surgery. She had wrestled as Liz Chase, getting fairly regular bookings early in her career. Of late, she had worked as a regular for Florida Championship Wrestling. Barry Blaustein, Roddy Piper, Hulk Hogan and Terry Funk will be appearing on Larry King Live on March 15 for the full hour to talk about Beyond the Mat, and Ric Flair may appear as well. It's a terrible guest mix since Hogan, Piper and Flair haven't seen the movie. Funk will probably be very good since he was one of the stars of the movie and handled himself very well at the audience questioning at the premiere. Hogan is at least good at being Hogan on talk shows, but his presence may overshadow everyone else. Plus, at this point he's not about to say anything negative regarding Vince McMahon or the WWF, which has made itself a major part of this story. Piper has been a total embarrassment on every media appearance he's been on as of late. Piper is still caught up in the protecting the business mindset from the 70s, which makes him look like a fool in public because he's the only one left with that mindset and would probably hate the movie because it exposed the business since he's from that era. The King people were turned down by the WWF and Vince McMahon to do the show, and of course Mick Foley can't do it. Nor The Tonight Show nor Politically Incorrect because the movie would be brought up. So went with WCW, and I don't even want to speculate on why WCW decided sending Piper would be a good idea. It is possible that the King people, being older and out of touch with the modern wrestling scene, saw Hogan and Piper as the two biggest stars. Still, WCW should be building their future, and at every opportunity like this should, if possible, push sending younger and more articulate people. Bill Goldberg would have fit this scenario so much better because he's not a clown in public, or even someone like Rey Mysterio Jr., who can relate to the passion one has to perform at the highest level and broken down more doors and bucked more ads than anyone, but has also paid the consequences. Or even Mike Tenay because of his overall knowledge rather than turning it into the possible stereotypical wrestler as guest clown show if Piper is there. The movie got a great review in the San Jose Mercury by Andrew Gilbert, from its appearance at the Cinequest Film Festival, by a reporter who was not a wrestling fan at all. The reviewer was most interested by Jake Roberts and Funk. In fact, he never mentioned Mick Foley once in the review, categorizing the two aging performers in a business that falls somewhere between boxing and the NFL when it comes to exploiting athletes. The reviewer found Funk to be the positive story, but from the movie believed he was returning for one last match, the Amarillo match, not realizing the guy still wrestles today, despite his family's pleas. The negative was Roberts, called a once famous wrestler now working grimy arenas, unable to cope with his resentful daughter and trying to keep his drug addiction at bay. The review concluded saying Beyond the Mat is documentary at its best, a disturbing and moving portrait of men working in a brutal field of entertainment. Christopher Daniels won the annual Super 8 tournament for the East Coast Wrestling Alliance on February 26 in Wilmington, Delaware, beating Scoot Andrews in the finals. It's basically become an annual tradition that is the American Independence version of the Super J tournament. The third annual Brian Pillman Memorial Show takes place on May 25th at Xavier Schmidt Fieldhouse in Cincinnati. Already agreeing to attend are Diamond Dallas Page, Chris Benoit, Shane Douglas, Dean Malenko, D'Lo Brown, Al Snow, Chris Condito, Terry Taylor, Tammy Sitch, and Missy Hyatt. Blue Meanie and Jim Neidhart were crowned the first MCW Tag Team Champions, having been the last two in a battle royal on February 26 in Memphis at the New Daisy Theater. The gimmick is that Neidhart hates Meanie being his partner. Chris Jericho appeared doing a promo saying he and Curtis Hughes had plans for an MCW. On PPW, Sir Mo is in as a heel feuding with Ali. Brandon Baxter is now the top heel manager with his cartel, claiming through his lawyer, Perry James, that he had a 2-year unbreakable contract. Sir Mo, now called Rob, real name Bobby Moore, and Black Cat are called the Regulators. Black Cat was called by Mo his brother Dion. Mike Youngblood debuted. In probably the funniest line on any TV show of the past week, Corey Macklin asked if Mike was related to Chief J Youngblood, confusing Chief J Strongbow with the late J Youngblood, I guess. They announced a merger of PPW with Moondog Wrestling. Baxter ripped on Big Daddy, the promoter of Moondog Wrestling, and he attacked Baxter until 7 and Havoc helped Baxter, bringing out Moondog's spot for the save. CB Wyatt brought out his mother Julie, who told Hales to take a DNA test which would prove Wyatt was his son. On an NWA President Howard Brody got a letter published in Newsweek responding to the statement that Ted Turner bought or owned the NWA. The 52nd NWA anniversary show takes place the weekend of October 13th to October 15th in Nashville. There will be a benefit show for the family of the late Gary Albright on April 19th in Allentown, Pennsylvania at the fairgrounds, with all proceeds to benefit the family. The Rock will make a special appearance that afternoon at a school for photos with The Rock to raise money, $50, which also gets you a ticket to the show, plus scheduled to appear are Rikishi, Cactus Jack, Headbangers and Gangrel from the WWF, and Steve Williams and Johnny Smith from All Japan. At this point, Sabu is expected to work the March 16th Stampede Wrestling show in Calgary. Dan Denton, a pro wrestler who has worked a lot in Canada and Mexico as well as done a lot of reporting, has finished a documentary called BC Body Slams about life in a hardcore independent promotion that will air in Canada on CTV shortly. Justin Credible will be working the TWA, Shawn Michaels promotion, show on March 21st in San Antonio. The idea would be, if possible, for a talent trade for Michaels to make an appearance for ECW. But that's all in Vince McMahon's hands. The AWA has announced that the Road Warriors, whose WWF contracts expired last month, although they hadn't been used in a long time, would be appearing on shows for them in April and May. The company was hinting at doing Road Warriors vs. Rock and Roll Express in May. Speaking of Rock and Roll Express, on a February 18th indie show in Fayette, Alabama, Robert Gibson was in the main event and said the Rock and Roll Express hadn't split up, but that the reason they don't wrestle together in the area is because they both spend 32 weeks a year together in Japan. What was funny about that is the show was held near Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where Gibson lives, often runs his own house shows, and owns a store that sells wrestling merchandise, and he's nearly always at the store. NWA Worldwide is tentatively planning to do a Christine Jarrett Memorial Show on April 8th in Nashville at the Fairgrounds, the building she promoted and took tickets at for decades. The idea to do it is definite, but it first has to be approved by Jerry Jarrett and Eddie Marlin. They are attempting to book some major WCW names for that show since they have a working agreement with the company. ECW wrestlers Rhino and Mike Awesome headline the Hardcore Wrestling Federation show in Guelph, ONT on March 26th, as will Chris Condito and Tammy Sitch. According to promoter Kevin Kleinrock of Extreme Pro Wrestling, it is not official that the group would be starting on KTLA in Los Angeles in April. They are expecting a TV deal in Los Angeles to be announced within the next week. Jose Estrada Sr., the longtime WWF prelim wrestler of the 70s and 80s, is doing a heel commissioner role for the IWA in Puerto Rico. Alexander Otska is headed in for a short tour with this group. Future Wrestling Alliance on March 11th in Palo Alto, Pennsylvania is billing the final match of Mike Quackenbush, who has announced his retirement. Kurgan won the Extreme Canadian Championship Wrestling Heavyweight title at the company's February 25th TV taping. Dirty White Boy and Jeff Anderson won the Tennessee Mountain Wrestling Tag Team titles from Bob Armstrong and Tim Horner on February 26th in Knoxville. Terry Taylor worked the North American Wrestling Federation show on February 25th in Racine, Wisconsin against local wrestler Berlin Bomber. The stips were that if Bomber won, he'd get a WCW contract. Taylor came to the ring and said if Bomber would lay down and allow him to get the pin, he'd give him a contract. Bomber laid down like he was going to let him, then kicked out at 2, saying he wanted to earn his shot to the crowd of 375 fans. Bomber got the pin a few minutes later. Taylor then told him if there's anything he's learned about pro wrestling, it's that everyone lies, and told him he lied to him about getting a contract. The second annual Dan Curtis Memorial Show will take place on April 14th at Troy Athens High in the Detroit area with Marty Jannetty as the headliner. All of the receipts to go the Ronald McDonald House of Detroit. At the 2000 American Film Market, wrestling was remarkably absent of projects. There were no wrestling movies being screened, nor were there any movies involving wrestlers being screened, such as No B movies with Roddy Piper, Rena Mero, Hulk Hogan, Buff Bagwell, and the usual suspects. Drake Dawson and Curtis Thompson, known as Triple X, won the NWA tag titles from Kit Carson and Chris Germany, Team Extreme, on March 5th in Cornelia, Georgia. They had a Peach State Wrestling reunion show on February 27th in Cordell, Georgia, featuring wrestlers that worked for the company run by Ben Masters years ago. The show drew about 450 fans and included Chris Walker, Chick Donovan, Bucky Siegler, Sherry Martel, Malia Hasaka, Steve Lawler, Scotty Riggs, Too Cold Scorpio, Ted Oates, Nightmare, Ted Allen, and the return of the Blazers, R.D. Swain and Ray Glacier Buzz Stern Lloyd, who were the group's top babyface tag team years ago. Jason Sanderson is presenting the second annual New England Wrestlers Reunion on August 4th and August 5th in Epping, New Hampshire. For more info for anyone that worked for people such as Paul Bowser, Tony Santos, Jack Pfeffer, Adam Horshack, Eddie Quinn or Abe Ford, contact Tom Burke at 413-733-6015. AWA Superstars of Wrestling show on February 29th in Laughlin, Nevada. They were promoting the show with photos of Mankind, claiming he would make a special appearance, and were selling Cactus Jack t-shirts. The show went on without any mention of Foley, although there were many Foley chants from the packed house of 350 fans. Also no showing were Yokozuna and La Parka, who was announced as being injured the night before, while Adrian Lynch was under the mask as Golga. Finally, as the show ended, the Foley chants were really loud, so the ring announcer said that due to the injuries he suffered in the Hell in a Cell match, he couldn't appear. Fans were chanting refund, but the ticket salespeople packed up and left. The only major stars who did appear were Candido and Sitch did an angle where she stripped porn star Jasmine St. Clair down to a G-string, but he had her body face down on the mat, so no boob shots, before she was saved by a towel. USA Pro Wrestling on March 11th in Staten Island, New York at the Sportsfest has Sergeant Slaughter vs. King Kong Bundy plus Jimmy Snuka, Big Dick Dudley, Brutus Beefcake, Demolition Axe, Ace Darling, Julio Fantastico, Patriot, Tom Brandy, and Tommy Cairo. March 25th in Mineola, New York at the Knights of Columbus Hall has Prince Albert vs. Bundy plus Beefcake, Dudley, Snuka, Fantastico, and Cousin Luke. Independent Wrestling Federation on March 11th in South Plainfield, New Jersey at Grand Slam USA Independent Championship Wrestling in Sandoval, Illinois on March 25th at the high school headlined by Typhoon. Local Pro Wrestling Express is on Pittsburgh Channel 59 at 8 p.m. on Saturdays as a lead-in for the ECW show. Empire Wrestling Federation on March 24th in San Bernardino, California at the high school and March 11th in the same city at the Boys and Girls Club. MMA. At press time, this is the March 10th UFC lineup for Lake Charles, Louisiana. Kevin Randleman defends the heavyweight title against Pedro Hitso. Scott Adams vs. Ian Freeman. Travis Fulton suffered a broken hand this past week and won't be available. Ted Williams vs. Steve Judson. Tremaine Andre vs. Lance Gibson. Fabiano Iha vs. Dave Mena. Tiki Gosen, a member of Tito Ortiz's team vs. Bob Cook. From Frank Shamrock's team, Jens Pulver. From Bob Shamrock's team vs. David Velasquez. From Frank Shamrock's team. And the dark match is Shoney Carter vs. Brad Gum. The scary thing about this show is that the two biggest names on the card to UFC fans are going to be the two refs, John McCarthy and Dan Severn. As you can see, outside of the main event, this show is loaded with big-name fighters, continuation of past programs and, well, you get the drift. When even people who watch every UFC show won't know anyone on the card, let alone have a reason to care about the matchups, except in the main event, things are really bad. K1 held a press conference on March 7th and announced they would be promoting tournaments this year in 8 different countries with the top 2 finishes in each tournament going into the big tournament, which this year I believe will consist of something like 32 or 40 men. The tournaments will take place February 27th in Australia, April 16th in the United Kingdom, April 15th in either Europe or Russia, May 20th in either Europe or Russia, June 10th in Africa, July 8th in Europe or Russia, and they didn't announce a date but said there would also be a North American Championship tournament held in San Jose this year. They would also have major tournament shows on July 30th at Nagoya Rainbow Hall, August 20th at the Yokohama Arena, and October 9th at the Fukuoka Marine Meki. It's interesting to note as a sign of a decline in interest in buying tickets to K1, since TV ratings have remained very strong, that the only Japanese tournament show held at a dome will be the finals on December 10th at the Tokyo Dome. The other big show of the year is April 23rd at the Osaka Dome with Jerome LeBanner vs. Francisco Filio, Andy Hug vs. Graub Vitoza, Musashi vs. Nicholas Petas, and Ernesto Hust vs. Sam Greco. Also announced is that on the March 19th K1 show at Yokohama Arena they'll have a pro wrestling style match for the debut of Great Kusatsu Jr. Great Kusatsu wrestled in the US and Japan in the 70s, who faced Mitsuhiro Matsunaga in the first time ever in K1 match where barbed wire boards are legal. So much for the idea they don't do works in K1. Pancrase president Masami Ozaki claimed that Dream Stage Entertainment was trying to raid 5 more of their fighters. He talked about Vernon White, Ebenezer Fontes Braga, Guy Mesger, and Ken Shamrock, all originally Pancrase wrestlers, going to DSE. He said DSE wanted Semischult but Pancrase has him under contract. He said they would send 2 or 3 guys to the April 14th UFC Japan, which is a new date for the show, which at this point looks to be headlined by Tito Ortiz fighting for the vacant UFC middleweight title at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym, have a big show of their own on April 30th at the Yokohama Bunka Gym, Schultz defending the COP title against Yoshiki Takahashi, send 1 fighter to the Coliseum 2000 show on May 26th at the Tokyo Dome besides Masakatsu Funaki, who headlines against Rickson Gracie. On June 26th at Korakuen Hall, Pancrase is going to create its first light heavyweight and middleweight champions with tournaments for both titles. The May 13th World Extreme Fighting Show from Muncie, Indiana will be headlined by Conan Silveira vs. Dan Severn. There are a few interesting undercard matches including Jose Pele Landy, who beat Pat Militic on the last West show and is the #1 ranked lightweight in the world, facing Dave Mena, Who's on this week's UFC show? Matt Hughes vs. Chris Brennan, Carlos Newton vs. Jorge Patino, and Jeremy Horn vs. Hiromitsu Kanehara of Rings in a rematch of their match. Kanehara won via decision in October, which broke Horn's 27-match winning streak that dated back to the Frank Shamrock fight. ECW. It now appears Sabu is done with the company again, and the next question is how everything will wind up. At March 4th ECW Arena show, Sabu was actually given a script, something Heyman never gives anyone, which called for a match at the arena where it would start out as Super Crazy vs. C.W. Anderson. Sabu would interfere and put Anderson through a table, leading to Crazy getting the win. Cyrus would then order Crazy vs. Sabu for the TV title tournament, after Crazy seemingly had already beaten Anderson in his TV title tournament first round match to make Crazy the big underdog, and Sabu would miss a table spot and Crazy would pin him after a moonsault. Sabu, who was dressed when he got the script, left the building with John Pee Wee Moore after saying he wasn't going to do the job. It's pretty clear that Heyman knew ahead of time that Sabu would never put over Crazy because Sabu is stuck in that Ed Farhat mentality about doing jobs, and he feels he's done enough of them. Heyman claimed when they talked during the week Sabu told him he wasn't going to do a job, which is why Heyman laid out a script, basically to cover himself if/when this goes to court, and that Sabu told him he would be wrestling in Calgary on March 3rd and couldn't make connections back for the ECW Arena show. Heyman also had to be figuring that if the story would play out this way, and those close to the situation say he predicted it would turn out exactly as it did, there was word even in midweek that Sabu would be asked to do a job at the arena and would probably walk out since he apparently told Heyman on the phone no jobs. If there would have been sympathy for Sabu regarding Heyman now threatening legal action for a contract breach, a lot will likely be taken away since he wouldn't put over Crazy, who Heyman has been trying to elevate, specifically into Sabu's old spot, and who has probably been the most consistently good wrestler in the company over the past year plus. Wouldn't play well to either his dressing room or the outside world, nor should it, for that matter. Heyman said he wouldn't do anything to keep Sabu from making a living, but it would have to be in Japan, as he's going to try and ice him from going to WCW or WWF. My feeling of what is going on is Heyman, because of what TNN wanted from the beginning, which was every key player under contract so TNN wouldn't expose and make new stars on a national basis, only to have them jump to USA, TNT and TBS, rival networks to appear on their shows, is a period like with Taz, where they wouldn't immediately jump from one station to the other, and one of the companies buying out the remainder of Sabu's contract from ECW, which expires in 2003. The ECW Hardcore Revolution video game was the number 2 selling game on Sony PlayStation and number 6 in Nintendo 64 for the week of February 13th to 19th, which means the game has sold over 600,000 units, which is an amazing total since ECW reaches just under 1 million homes per week for its main show on TNN. As it stands right now, the main event on the pay-per-view on March 12th looked to be a three-way dance for the tag titles with new champs Mike Awesome and Raven, having won the belts on March 4th at the ECW Arena, Masato Tanaka, who will be leaving back for FMW after the pay-per-view show, and Tommy Dreamer and Lance Storm and Justin Credible. There will also be a 4-man tournament for the vacant ECW TV title with Super Crazy vs. Little Guido, but expect Yoshihiro Tao to somehow be involved, and Rhino vs. Sandman as the semi-finals. Nearly everyone considers it a given that Rhino is getting the title since they already shot an angle with Rhino and Van Dam at the ECW Arena for the title when Van Dam returns. The only other match strongly pushed is Steve Corino vs. Dusty Rhodes in a bull rope match. There's been speculation of Balls Mahoney vs. Kentaro Kanemura as well. Notes from the March 4th ECW Arena show, which drew a packed house of 1,500. The show opened with what was reported to us as the best ECW match in months, with Storm and Credible beating Ghetto and Jado, with the place going nuts for all the near falls and false finishes. This was said to have made Storm and Credible look like a great team more than any match they've had thus far. Guido beat Kid Cash, which I believe will be repacked later as if it's part of the TV title tournament, which at this point hadn't been announced. During and Roadkill beat Pitbulls. The crowd popped big for the return of the Pitbulls, who were big favorites a few years back before losing their jobs in the wake of a drug trafficking arrest and subsequent plea bargain. However, a lot has happened since they left. The quality of the work overall has improved greatly, and Gary Wolf was never any good, and Anthony Durante did some good spots but was one of those early ECW guys who looked a lot better when their matches were heavily edited before airing, but since he hasn't worked in a long time, he's nowhere near that level. The match was said to have been terrible, including a totally messed up finish that had to be improvised. Apparently there are some plans since Heyman had the Pitbulls turn on each other after the match. Wolf has worked a few shows of late for ECW but hasn't looked good. Then came the angle where Cyrus stripped Van Dam of the TV title. Scotty Riggs, brought in as Van Dam's best friend, was part of the angle. It said Cyrus talked for nearly 20 minutes and was tremendous in his role. He's probably the best heel talker in the business right now, because he's really better than Triple H, just doesn't have the spotlight and aura of the bright lights, and while Flair is better, nobody wants to boo Flair. Where he lost them is apparently nobody bought the key crux of the angle when he claimed that if Van Dam, who came out during the segment and did one of his best ever promos, didn't give him the TV title, then ECW would be cancelled by TNN. While they built up to that TV storyline, nobody bought it. Van Dam gave him the belt to save ECW from cancellation. Van Dam and Rhino then had a pull apart. Cyrus then announced a tournament to end at the pay-per-view. On TV, they're already doing an angle where somehow Crazy has defied the network, as a way to elevate Crazy in the role of the guy getting screwed at the end, so you can see how the tournament should go. Rhino beat Spike Dudley, who came back for one last match even with his knee blown out. Dudley took one sick bump off the stage, onto two tables, then rolled off the tables and crotched himself. Dudley was telling people that he'll be out 6 to 9 months after the knee surgery. They're going to try and portray it as if Rhino was the one who put Dudley out of action. In the match originally scheduled for Sabu, Crazy beat C.W. Anderson in a real good match. Nova and Chetty and Mahoney beat the Baldies. Kentaro Kanemura did a run-in, bringing out New Jack, who did another balcony dive. Raven and Awesome beat Dreamer and Tanaka. We're told this match and the six-man that preceded it couldn't get any heat because they couldn't follow Crazy. Sandman beat Tao in a match that was said to be too long, but good after the 5 minutes mark, which must mean Tao is a miracle worker. Rhino and Sandman went at it after. Sabu's mother is out of the hospital. They debuted the FMW-style explosive ring match on March 3rd in Asbury Park, New Jersey before 2,300 fans. They did a gimmick where Corino said the rest of the show would be old-school wrestling by orders of TNN, so of course that meant the rest of the show was brawling and juice. They put Mahoney vs. Vic Grimes in the explosive match. Descriptions ranged from fair to horrible, largely due to the explosives. The first explosion was said to be weak, but since nobody had anything to compare it with, the fans chanted ECW. The second explosion, that was supposed to be the climax, was a dud and it killed the match. They'll probably go around the country with the explosive ring match and it should draw well the first time out. They did some TNN tapings at this show as well, including another Awesome vs. Tanaka title match which ended when Dreamer and Raven got involved. Raven laid out Tanaka and Awesome laid out Dreamer both through tables. Simon Diamond is out for a few weeks with a back injury. Mikey Whipwreck was back ready to work but he wasn't used. Sabu was also in Asbury Park but not used. At some point, probably about 2 months down the line, they should put Cyrus with Awesome while building up the Van Dam match and portray Awesome as a strong heel with Cyrus doing the talking for him because it's a major league main event combination. The idea of this weekend was to give During and Roadkill their big chance, with wins over Ghetto and Jado and Pitbulls. However, both matches were terrible, and their stock dropped in a lot of people's eyes, with people saying they were like indie guys who can have real good matches with people they always work with but look bad against anyone else. Ghetto and Jado and Kanemura had just arrived in town just a few hours before Asbury Park after the big flight, so were feeling the effects of jet lag and didn't look good the first night. Fans chanted FMW at Ghetto and Jado the second night when they had the hot match. As it turns out, the Arena Football League revived its season after the labor dispute it was announced ended it a few weeks ago. So the TNN schedule, which includes 2 ECW preemptions or time slot changes this summer, will go as planned. TNN on March 3rd, just 9 days before the pay-per-view, didn't even list one match for the pay-per-view. Paul Heyman's belief is that he has 80,000 buys for just about every pay-per-view show, no matter how good or bad a job the company does of hyping the show, and he feels as long as he produces good shows, it doesn't matter whether matches are hyped in advance or not. The shot opened with Awesome over Spike Dudley from Milwaukee with a power bomb through a vertical table. It was the usual match as far as Awesome killing Dudley with stiff moves and Dudley juicing big, including 3 hard power bombs, with Dudley kicking out a lot before getting pinned in about 8 minutes. Very good for what it was, although Dudley isn't going to get a long career. The Impact players jumped Tanaka when he was doing an interview in Japanese to set up the tag title change angle later in the show. Corino did a lengthy promo to build up his bull rope match with Rhodes. He had Eric Watts, wearing an old Mid-South belt, added to his old school stable. I was hilarious when he said Crusher was a closet homosexual in Milwaukee. Ref HC Locke, claiming to be from Milwaukee, isn't he from New York? did a promo defending the city so Corino hit him with a cowbell and he juiced. It was funny that when Corino said that Dusty Rhodes had finally retired, the audience clapped. Crazy won a three-way over Tao and Guido in 8:41. Tao first pinned Guido with a brainbuster and then Crazy pinned Tao after a low blow and a top rope quebrada. This was pretty good as well. Rhino speared Crazy backstage after the match into a locker. For some reason, Crazy was standing up to the network. The feeling seems to be that if WWF takes the CBS deal, that Raw would move to TNN and ECW would be booted off. Recognizing this as a strong possibility, ECW on TNN of all places has been working on turning TNN heel for if/when this takes place. And TNN is so ignorant, they probably think it's some sort of a wrestling angle because Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff got mileage out of heel management. They finished with the clips from Cincinnati over the weekend leading to the tag title change. Francine yelled at Dreamer. Finally she slapped him after he called her breasts fake. Dreamer was about to piledriver her when Raven saved and DDT'd Dreamer, and Raven and Francine left. The Impact players came out and were doing a number on Dreamer until Tanaka made the save. They mainly brawled in the stands, did a few big spots in the ring before Tanaka pinned Credible in 5:58 with Diamond Dust to win the title. Dreamer and Tanaka celebrated big in the ring like they actually won something. It's that emotion that makes the titles mean something and why adding more titles, so winning them means nothing, is a negative to companies and why ECW's title changes always get over while in WCW they rarely do and in WWF, except the world title, they are hit and miss. Jim Mitchell, WCW James Vandenberg, signed a 3-year contract this past weekend so expect him to play a larger role imminently. WCW. The Super Brawl buy rate is coming in at closer to 0.15 than 0.20, which is by far the lowest buy rate ever for one of the big two companies. In fact, it is lower than most ECW buy rates, considerably lower than AAA did and in the range of what UWFI and K1, the early ones promoted by Bischoff from Japan, not the Vegas show which did .10, did with no television whatsoever. The fact this was done with Hogan and Flair's first pay-per-view match back after months speaks volumes that this company needs an entire facelift, and at this point, they're better off biting the bullet for a while with quarterly pay-per-view shows that they spend 3 months building because there is no reason the next show is going to do even as well. To put things into perspective, WCW's estimated company gross on the event was $773,000, and that's barely more than WWF grossed just for their Raw House show in Atlanta and less than WCW had grossed for a few of its biggest Nitros in the past. Even within the company the feeling is that Uncensored will do even worse. Nitro on March 6 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina drew an embarrassing crowd of 2,236 paid with 2,626 comps and $71,320 for a building that 1 year ago was one of the hottest buildings Nitro ever played at, selling out 16,000 seats. The first day tickets were put on sale. Finlay and Vampiro brawled backstage to start the show. Kaz Hayashi beat Psicosis in the best Nitro match in months at 4:38 when Artist hit Psicosis with the belt and Hayashi pinned him with a schoolboy. Hayashi did a big dive early onto both Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera. Vampiro and Finlay ended up brawling in the ring at one point. Psicosis and Guerrera laid out Artist after the match. Big Vito beat Ron Harris via DQ in 58. Vito did his implant DDT. The ref was distracted and Don switched with Ron and used a chain for the pin. The ref watched the replay and reversed the decision. This opens the question why they don't watch replays more often since most heel wins are illegal. The Harris twins handcuffed Vito to the ropes and gave the H-bomb to Johnny. A bunch of the NWA Nashville guys worked as security, trying to stop the Harris twins but they killed them. Eventually the Harris twins were arrested and taken from the building, leaving Jarrett without a tag partner for the main event. David Flair beat Wall via DQ in 2:28. This could have been worse. Wall stacked 2 tables up. David hit Wall with a crowbar, then like an idiot, put the crowbar down. Wall got up and choke slammed him through 2 tables. Wall actually had some facials. They played this up big with Hennig, Funk and Anderson all looking concerned, and making a big deal about how Ric Flair couldn't have cared less. They did a lot better job with the post-match this time than with Crowbar, as Daphne actually looked concerned. Bigelow confronted Wall doing a storyline of Bigelow getting him started, which I believe is a shoot, and Wall punched Bigelow and laid him out. That was well done. Dog pinned Evan Karagias in 3:54 after power slamming him off the middle ropes. This was ungodly awful. Not sure if this was a singles match since all 3 members of 3 Count were in the match the entire time. Knobs and Finlay also interfered. but it was acted as if they weren't part of the match. It was never explained if this was a singles or a handicap or a tag, but you needed no explanation that it was a mess. After the pin, there was no word about the hardcore title. I guess it isn't defended 24/7 in these parts. Flair and Luger did an interview backstage. The place went wild for Flair as a face. Jarrett introduced Wall as his partner in the main event. Nobody cared. Hennig pinned Flair in 7:38 with a fisherman suplex. This was a good match, but it was sad to see how dead Flair is because nobody feels good about booing him, that even when he has a good match the crowd doesn't react anymore. Flair started praising Duke, which was the only way to get the fans to boo him. After the match, Luger hit Hennig with the bat and Flair whipped him with Hogan's belt. They did the broken arm gimmick with the chair with Hennig. Anderson came out and stood over Hennig. Luger was about to hit Anderson with the bat from behind, but Flair, who had a stare down with Anderson, waved him off. Schiavone and Madden claimed if Luger had hit Anderson with the bat, that because of his neck injury, he'd be dead. They should have said paralyzed, because acting like someone could die in a wrestling angle, aside from killing credibility, just doesn't fit in a fun soap opera. Then again, what's fun about WCW? Hennig was put in an ambulance. An ambulance for a broken wrist? Lane and Idol tried to weld the Demon's casket as a rib. Demon wasn't in it. He attacked them and got double-teamed. Smiley beat Lane in 2:59 with the chicken wing. Smiley wrestled in a Michael Jordan Tar Heels jersey. This was a clumsy match with an even more botched-up spot. Miss Hancock came out, but they forgot to cue the music, so she just stood there and everyone started acting distracted even though she never did dance. Demon ran out and saved Smiley from a double team. They explained that since Smiley a few weeks back stole Demon's stuff, that somehow they were spiritual brothers. Only in WCW can you logically come up with a reason to save someone who burglarized you. Then again, only in WCW can they spend six figures on a gimmick like Kiss Demon and give it to Dale Torborg. In the stupidest part of the show, Abbott came out and the world's most dangerous 9-7 fighter did an interview, with no help from Gene Okerlund that he desperately needed, looking at the ground like a first grader who never spoke in front of the class before. He kind of intimated he'd tapped because they were going to take him off TV if he didn't. If we're to assume now he meant that pro wrestling has worked in their own storyline, then the whole gimmick for him to get over in the first place about him not being part of the work would have worked. But since he's part of the work, who cares about a guy who doesn't have a good body? Can't work and can't even do a promo? Abbott said he wasn't going to leave. Finally Parka came out and was KO'd. Meng then came out, but security held him back and J.J. Dillon told Meng he'd get 2 months suspended without pay if he went any farther. So Meng left. Then, for no reason, Abbott, who said they couldn't make him leave, then left. I guess they had to get on with the show. Why did they stop Meng if they didn't stop Parka? Why did they stop Meng when Abbott had hijacked the show and he was actually doing the company a favor? Why does nobody at the booking meetings ask the simplest of questions? Hogan did another of his 80s interviews. He didn't have a cast on. I guess he's tired of selling. He did mention the name of at least one doctor banned from WWF dressing rooms the same time as Dr. Hackett. In what started as Kidman vs. Stevie Ray ended with Kidman and Booker vs. New Heat. Big time horrible. Ray nearly killed his poor innocent little brother out of clumsiness and professional neglect. Finish saw Ray hit Kidman with his gimmick and Fat T pinned him in 2:39. Rhodes did an interview and basically tried to get over using inside terms to a bunch of college kids who didn't know them and was literally dying. Funk came out to save him. Funk was moving slower than ever. Funk pulled a chicken with no head, wearing diapers. That sort of looked like Dusty Rhodes out. Rhodes threw powder and gave him 2 pile drivers. Funk came back with barbed wire. Finally Jarrett and Wall beat Sid and Vampiro in 4:20. This was terrible. The only good thing about this match was the outfit Tylene Buck was wearing. Speaking of WCW women, they need to either get the women over as distinct personalities with gimmicks and storylines so people will care about them, or dump all of them because they are clearly at this point no value to ratings and they make the show seem like amateur hour. Vampiro didn't come across like he belonged in a main event. Wall was awful. Finish saw Jarrett hit Sid with a guitar and Wall choke slammed Sid. Jarrett pinned Sid while Wall choke slammed Vampiro. Madden tried to get Vampiro over as the next Sting, but since he's always losing every match, somehow if you look back at Sting in 1988, he didn't do jobs on TV every week during that period. He shot from mid-card to superstardom in like a 1-month period. About all we got from March 7th Thunder tapings in Winston-Salem is the crowd was tiny, which we knew from the advance, and that Sid no-showed. Mysterio Jr. was there and apparently they actually thought he was able to work a little, which is why they wanted him at TV. not realizing he had reconstructive surgery and he's 3 months away from coming back. So instead, for apparently no reason, he came out while Juventud was out, and cut a promo saying he'd be back in a few months. Jarrett beat Vampiro in a US title match. You'd think it was time Vampiro actually won a match while the announcers talk about how he's the next Sting. Apparently it was considered, but beating Jarrett before the pay-per-view where he's a world title challenger, and where most fans still don't believe he has a chance to win, isn't the right person this week to do it with. Vampiro should have gotten a win over someone like Luger or one of the twins to be elevated, and he needs at least one win soon, or even Jarrett after the pay-per-view if he's not in the main event in April. Even though this is old school booking, you still shouldn't make the pay-per-view title challenger look weak on TV leading to the show. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution on March 3 ran a series of articles on WCW, on the lawsuits filed by Sonny Ono, Harrison Norris, Hardbody Harrison, and Bobby Walker, on the declining ratings and on the lawsuit Shane Douglas is threatening to file. There was nothing groundbreaking in the stories. Besides claiming discrimination, they were suing claiming their independent contractor status was illegal and they were thus denied employee benefits such as vacation and sick time. Walker is still under contract to WCW, but complained that if it wasn't for racism, he could be a babyface with a big push. Walker said he was told by management that there weren't enough black people watching wrestling to push me. He said if that's true, it's only because there aren't enough black wrestlers for fans to follow. Alan Sharp claimed WCW demographics show that 87% of the audience is white, which is a higher percentage than the national average of 83%. Ono, who earned $160,000 for his role as a manager, he earned far more in side deals both as a liaison with Japan and in negotiating contracts for foreign talent and getting a cut. Ono said he was upset about the pay disparity. The average WCW salary for a wrestler is $300,000. He was more offended that Asians and Mexicans were predominantly given heel roles. Ono complained that WCW never had any minority writers. Thunder taped February 29 in Fargo, North Dakota was another dead show. Artist was DQ'd against Chavo Guerrero Jr., called Eddie Guerrero by Bobby Heenan, in 212 after he got caught by Charles Robinson hitting him with the title belt. Guerrero did an interview afterwards with Gene Okerlund, explaining he went broke on his old gimmick, multi-level marketing, but ending up by pickpocketing Okerlund. Luckily WCW doesn't present minorities in demeaning roles. Dustin Rhodes did an interview. They showed a clip of him attacking Funk at an autograph session. It was so sad to see just a few fans there. Even in their own worked angles they don't get enough people to make it look like their wrestlers are important. Rhodes broke a pitcher on him and poured coffee on him. In the ring, as Rhodes was doing his interview, Funk came back with a few chair shots until Rhodes made his own comeback with chair shots. The show was built around these sleazy and cheesy contests with the NWO girls to dump one of them from the group. They had a spelling bee, where they got their little inside joke when they asked one of the women how to spell rat. They had a bikini contest. WWF does the same thing and draws ratings with them because they present them as something. WCW takes a decent idea and then executes it so poorly it becomes a bad one. Knobbs and Finlay and the Dog, Al Green, beat 3 count in 252 when Dog power bombed Shane Helms off the middle rope through a table. You know things are bad when your youth movement is a late 30s Al Green push. I was wondering if Knobbs and Finlay and Dog had won the hardcore title since the announcers never explained whether it was a title match or a non-title match. Then I realized what an idiot I was. How could a 3-man team hold a singles title? La Parka did his gimmicked interview. Parka pinned Demon in 158 with a low blow and rolling shoulder block. At first they looked to be setting Bagwell up with Miss Hancock. Heenan came back after the segment saying, "I've never seen him, Bagwell, having bad luck with the ladies. We know he doesn't watch anything, but shouldn't they have someone in the company type things up and at least fax them the current angles?" Luger beat Vampiro in 532 when Liz hit Vampiro with the bat and Luger racked him. Flair was out there as well. This was the match Vampiro needed to win, so the result was no surprise. They did the broken arm gimmick with Vampiro. They went backstage. Vampiro was mad getting off the stretcher. A stretcher for a broken arm? Finlay jumped him again after the match. Mickey J pinned Mark Johnson in 138 when Nick Patrick gave Jay a roll of quarters. Crowbar beat Wall in 235 when Wall choke slammed him off the apron through the announcer's table. It was a great bump. Mike Tenay did an excellent job selling it. The crowd didn't take it seriously in the least as the stretcher and the ambulance have become cliches on all wrestling shows due to overuse. You saw no concern from anyone from this angle. A lot of the problem was with David Flair and Daphne, who stayed in character, thus alerting the audience to the fact that nothing serious had happened. Either these guys have no idea how to book an angle in the year 2000, or they are just trying to pretend to give guys angles, and when they don't succeed, use it as an excuse not to give anyone a push. Sid did an interview with Booker and Kidman. Sid started speaking a new dialect. That was kind of funny. Tenay still tried to play up the crowbar injury huge. Flair beat Bagwell in 5:13 when Luger hit him with the bat and Flair got the pin. There was a sign in full view saying Flair needs a wonder bra. I wonder if fans held up signs like that during Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Wayne Gretzky's last season. Signs like that are also an indication as to why Flair has to be a babyface and do interviews every week in the suit and tie at this stage and wrestle maybe once every 12 weeks on TV, so fans are begging to see it rather than not caring when they watch, and a few times per year on pay-per-view. Anything else serves no purpose because he means nothing for ratings in this role either as a pushed heel or wrestling every TV show. With both, he becomes part of the problem, not the solution. Bagwell, showing zero signs of damage after being hit with a baseball bat, started consoling the NWO girl with no name who had been dumped when the other girls threw powder or something on her. Harris twins and Jarrett beat Kidman and Booker and Sid in 3:15 when Kidman hit Booker with a missile dropkick when Jarrett moved, and Jarrett pinned Booker. The Harris twins did the H-bomb on Kidman and Booker, and Jarrett hit Vicious with a guitar shot again. If he really got a concussion from it 2 weeks ago, there's no way in hell he's letting the guy do it. And if he didn't get a concussion from it, then he no-showed a Thunder taping. Under those circumstances, there's no he should be in the top position in the company unless he had Hogan-like drawing power, so for money reasons his foibles can be overlooked for business. But Sid on top is bad business, and generally speaking his track record from every shot he's had indicated that would be the case. WCW and the big company are planning a big publicity campaign to build for Goldberg's return in April. The plan originally had been for Vicious to be portrayed as a dominating champion, go heel and lose it to Goldberg. The plan was then given to turn as many hot faces as possible heel and feed them to Goldberg. The big question right now regards Hogan. Hogan going heel at this point could be a career killer, and Sting going heel against Goldberg is even more likely to be a career killer since he's close to dead anyway, and the feeling is he won't go for the scenario, since the end result is also him having to put Goldberg over clean if it's done right. The debate seems to be whether to debut Goldberg on pay-per-view on April 16th or on Nitro on April 17th, with the feeling maybe leaning toward Nitro because nobody is watching their PPVs right now. Bill Bush got the word this past week that Bret Hart would be back in July at the earliest. Hart received notice that as of February 16th, his pay was cut in half, and that as of April 15th, he can be fired. Bush told Hart that he had no idea his pay was cut and that it was something done by the legal department, and they'd work it out when Hart comes back. The Winnipeg Sun had a lengthy article on Hart's condition, saying that he doesn't remember what he did on Christmas or New Year's. He said it's been harder on him that some people close to him don't believe he's really injured than actually missing the wrestling. Hart was also asked about Marty McSorley's incident where he hit Donald Brashear in the head with a hockey stick and said that he thought it was negligent, and it's pretty damn close whether or not the cops should get involved. Since a lot have asked, Cassius of Harlem Heat is the former 4x4 from the No Limit Soldiers gimmick, whose name I believe is Teddy Reed. At least that's what his name Wrestling Indies was. There is consideration given to linking Sting and Vampiro as a team, with the idea it would elevate Vampiro and perhaps freshen up Sting. The question again involves whether Sting would see teaming with a guy that at this point has no credibility but is starting to get over, as a demotion and nix it. Kevin Sullivan has an idea of turning Crowbar into a young Cactus Jack by having him get sympathy while taking crazy bumps. The problem with the angle with Wall is they also think they can make a monster out of Wall, and they don't realize that in the year 2000, a 6'7" guy with no charisma is Midian, not John Studd. Terry Taylor is off the booking committee. According to those close to the situation, Taylor had the best ideas. This wasn't a demotion, and it had nothing to do with the situation WCW is in but related to non-wrestling aspects of life, but a decision Taylor made voluntarily, and perhaps only temporarily. He'll continue to work as a road agent. Nash was also dropped from the committee. Nash is also off the booking committee, but already working on going over people's heads to get back on. The feeling was that Nash was a detriment to anything getting accomplished positively at the meetings. Nash is trying to tell the wrestlers, and there's probably some truth to this statement as well, that the people at the meetings are clueless how to reach the demographic that watches wrestling, and that's why they need him there. Others have joked that Nash, pushing 41, was the one who supposedly understood the demographic the most, but was the one who actually did the most damage to the company when he was in power of anyone. At this point, virtually everything of significance is being done by Sullivan and Ferrara. There are infrequent meetings with others, but they are doing the bulk of the work. Ross Foreman is back on the committee to an extent as far as being part of the meetings. The feeling is that Sullivan is being given a chance right now to sink or swim, and when he sinks, either Taylor will be brought back, or possibly even Russo. It's all mind-boggling at this point. Regarding Saturn's story about Jericho's fiancée buying the dolls of he and Malenko and them being rung up as Hogan and Sting, we received a correspondence from someone who went to the store, found the Jericho and Malenko WCW dolls, bought them, and they were rung up as Hogan and Sting. He also bought some Steiner Brothers dolls that were both rung up as Hogan. The Misfits are threatening a lawsuit against WCW claiming that Vampiro is using their look with the spiked leather jacket, etc., as if nobody in wrestling ever wore anything like that before. The lawyers for Jerry Kayaffa, Jerry Only, and Paul Kayaffa, Doyle von Frankenstein, are claiming WCW has exploited the name Misfits and logos, artwork and clothing designs and claim that Ian Hodgkinson has tried to pass himself off to the general public as a member of the band, by wearing their style makeup and a spiked jacket and worn clothes with their logo. They also claim WCW has marketed a Vampiro action figure which has logos and artwork associated with the Misfits. Both Juventud Guerrera and Chris Kanyon were at Thunder on February 29th. Guerrera didn't work because he was scheduled to second Psychosis, who once again no-showed. Kanyon was supposed to put over Bagwell, with the gimmick that Bagwell would hit on Kanyon's girls and get shot down to set up the match. It fell apart because Kanyon's girls weren't there, but we heard also that they had other girls they could have used in the spot, and at that point Kanyon and Sullivan wound up in a disagreement, and he was pulled from the show and Flair was put in the spot. Speaking of Bagwell, he signed a new contract this past week, then missed the March 6th Nitro with a knee injury, which for better or worse in each situation is different, because of the nature of the company and morale everyone is skeptical of. Granted, everyone at this point is skeptical of both the real injuries and the worked ones. Hall is expected back in a few weeks. The Maestro vs. Cat program looks at this point like it's being dropped. They proposed a program to Goldberg for his return against Jarrett and he didn't like the way it was laid out. Mysterio Jr. was scheduled for March 6th Nitro to do an angle but wasn't there. Larry Hennig was also there to do an angle on February 28th in Minneapolis, but it didn't happen, as Hennig is believed to have not wanted to do an angle since his son was jobbing in his big return in his home city. Keiji Muto was scouting WCW developmental talent for possible trips to Japan this week, so all the younger wrestlers were pulled from working Nashville. If there is some good news, it is that the upcoming England tour is a huge success, at least before they get there. March 10th in Birmingham, England is sold out at $380,000 plus. March 11th in London should be sold out at the 12,229-seat arena. Before you read this, and the advance is more than $360,000. And March 12th in Manchester, England topped 13,000 tickets sold in the 19,609-seat arena for more than $370,000. Also, the Goldberg Monster Truck is kicking ass in whatever division it's in, as it is currently ranked number 1 in the nation. Diamond Dallas Page is writing his second book called Positive Affirmation for Kids from A to Z with DDP. I know this proposed book sounds to the public like another Cat Bo commercial. I'm about halfway through his current book. We'll probably have review in about a week or two. I wouldn't rate it as a must-read like the Dynamite Kid or Mick Foley books. DDP was plugging his book on Craig Kilborn on March 6th and said that he's out with an injury but isn't sure he wants to come back. Thunder on February 29th at the Fargo, North Dakota Dome drew 2,285 paid and 3,083 comps for a $56,704 house. March 1st Saturday night tapings in Bismarck, North Dakota drew 1,360 paid and 1,163 comps for a $29,266 house. A house show on March 4th in Fayetteville, North Carolina drew 2,816 paying $63,410. March 5th in Charlotte for a house show drew 1,169 plus 2,697 comps for an atrocious $26,860 gate, which has to be the smallest Charlotte crowd for wrestling in a good 6+ years going back to the darkest days of the company. We don't have complete records, but merchandise reports are in the $3.78 per head range, which is the lowest in many years. The main event was Vicious over Flair. As you can imagine, nobody in Charlotte wants to boo Flair, so at this point clearly they just won't pay to see him as a heel, and I don't think that's the psychological reaction a company should be looking for. The ones that came politely cheered him and sort of cheered Sid as Flair played more and more heel. The finish saw Luger and Elizabeth interfere, and Liz was about to use the bat when Arn Anderson stopped Liz from using the bat. Flair got mad and Anderson turned around and got choke slammed for the pin. They did a three-way dance for the tag titles, but with David Flair on his own against the Mamalukes and Harris twins, selling the crowbar injury. Flair was a non-entity early, but came back and hit one of the twins with the tire iron for the first pin. The rest of the match was 2-on-1 Mamalukes on Flair, with no psychology or comeback the whole period, and he just got pinned. Said to have been really weird to watch. WWF. Preliminary estimates are that the No Way Out pay-per-view did a 1.20 buy rate, which is an excellent number for the show between Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, which often does poorly. It's almost the exact number as last year's show did, 1.21, with the first ever singles match of McMahon vs. Austin in a cage. The overall company gross for the event would be approximately $5.80 million. More details on the WWF quarterly report. At the end of the quarter, January 28, the WWF had $243 million in cash assets, made up of $172 million coming from the IPO and the other $71 million in accrued profits over the 18 years the company has been in operation. The biggest reason why the gross revenue was up from $65.2 million to $98.4 million in comparing the third quarters was a $12.1 million increase in television advertising revenue, almost all due to the implementation of SmackDown. They also increased $5.8 million in live event grosses by increasing ticket prices 20% across the board to a $28 average. Attendance was steady, but because ticket prices were jacked up as compared with 1 year ago, there was an increase. There was a slight increase in pay-per-view revenue. There was a huge increase in licensed merchandise revenue from $18.9 million last year at this time to $32.5 million. They tripled online revenue both based on more advertising money coming in, and more e-commerce, and with the implementation of now 12 internet sites, they doubled total hits and more than tripled page views. The company's overall pre-tax profit for the quarter was $25,857,000 and net profit after estimated taxes was $15,721,000, basically meaning it earned 23 cents per share profit, well above estimates of 18 cents. The performance of the wrestling business at this point, if things don't change, is that at this pace, the company could actually lose $92 million per year on the XFL, which isn't going to come close to happening, and not only still not have any financial problems, but still run at a small profit. In other words, the wrestling business is so strong that while they could lose a lot of money starting up the XFL, it shouldn't threaten to even make the company not profitable overall, at least if things stay at this level. Given the cyclical nature of wrestling and how quickly fads change, predicting anything even 1 year in the future is always going to be speculative. At this point there are no real signs of any decline whatsoever in WWF, although the industry as a whole is clearly well past its peak. With all this great financial news, after a bump caused by the CBS rumors, the stock wound up the week at $12.63 per share. There was talk about doing an explosive ring match with Kane vs. X-Pac at WrestleMania. Raw on March 6 in Springfield, Massachusetts before a sellout 6,185 paying $205,170 seemed like the kind of show they did during that period when nobody in the audience wanted to see matches. The crowd was up for everything but died every time a match started. Show opened with Shane and Show coming out. Shane mentioned how Stephanie, the cheap slut that she is, drove Vince away from the business he created. So now he created pro wrestling. Next thing you know they'll have it that his great-grandfather invented television. Stephanie and Triple H came out. There was a terrorizing sign, which was Triple H's first ring name in the Boston area before he was Jean-Paul Levesque in WCW. Stephanie slapped Shane for calling her a slut. Basically they set up Triple H versus Rikishi and Kane versus Show. They went back to a hotel room where poor Crash Holly was wearing PJs while the posse woke Tim White up and had him put a ref shirt on so they could win the hardcore title. They delivered room service as a guise to knock on the door. They made the posse out to be complete idiots since they kept trying to pin the sleeping leprechaun on his bed but another member would pull them off. Again, as they started fighting each other, Crash ran out of the room, but not before they broke a lamp on him. Pete Gas was more interested in eating the food they brought, which was lunch, thereby exposing that Crash probably wasn't really sleeping, and it wasn't the morning, than chasing him down. It was really funny. Unfortunately, Kane vs. Show had no humor value at all. It was slow-motion wrestling with no heat. Kane did a DDT and Show's head slipped out so it missed the mat by a foot. Rock ran in and gave Show the rock bottom, so Kane was DQ'd in 3:32. Kane then gave Show the lowest choke slam ever in North America. It looked more like a sumo thrust than a choke slam. Mae Young is looking real old. They did an APA vignette. Henry power slammed Devon Dudley in 1:15. May did the worst Bronco Buster in history on Bubba. After the match they laid Henry out with a 3D and Bubba powerbombed May through the table. He didn't protect her anywhere close to how well he protected the two women who are both probably 45 years younger. I know she's a very tough ornery woman and some of the stuff with her is funny and a lot isn't. But when she gets hurt for real because they think seeing a 77-year-old taking big bumps is a hoot, it's not going to end up as a bunch of laughs. Too Cool NC Road Dogg and X-Pac in 4:30. Even this wasn't good. Everyone was off and there was no heat until the worm, which the crowd went crazy for. Tori, who for some reason is the best looking woman I've ever seen in a neck brace, tripped Grandmaster who crotched himself. Kane and Paul Bearer came out and Kane choke slammed Road Dogg while X-Pac ran away. Jericho beat Angle via DQ in an IC title match in 4:10 when Bob Backlund ran in and put Jericho in the chicken wing. They messed up the first high spot but it got better from there. There was a ref bump and Jericho hit the K-Brada but no ref. He put on the walls, but Angle made the ropes and Backlund ran in. Backlund is a complete idiot doing the goofball out of touch routine while at the same time running for the US House of Representatives. Rikishi beat Triple H via DQ in 5 minutes. Even this didn't have that much heat even with two over top guys in there. Bout was so-so. The place popped big when Rock came out and hit Triple H with the rock bottom and Rikishi bonsai'd Triple H. Blackman pinned Matt Hardy in 4:44 with a front kick off the top rope. Definitely quiet and not good. Malenko and Saturn beat Edge and Christian in 5:13. This was technically good, but still had no heat. Terry was at ringside and sold an ankle injury which distracted Edge. They did basically the old Eliminator's total elimination move on Christian for the pin. Crash Holly kept the hardcore title beating Viscera in 2:50. Viscera destroyed the guy. It was better than it sounds. They went backstage. At one point Viscera threw Crash sliding across a table, and he went into a garbage can. They ended up brawling into the Acolytes card game and Viscera crashed on the table, so Farouk hit him with a bottle and Crash pinned him. Bradshaw lariated Crash after. Farouk and Bradshaw then tried to cheat each other on their poker hand. I guess this was as entertaining as anything involving Viscera is going to get. Henry came back from the hospital and attacked the Dudleys in their dressing room, but they both beat him up. Finally, they brought this cage out from some tiny regional office in the 1960s. It was flimsy and looked ready to collapse at any second. Rock and Benoit still had an excellent match. Shane and Show and Stephanie and Triple H were at ringside. Benoit used 2 German suplexes, Rock blocked the third and hit the rock bottom. Rock later power-bombed Benoit off the top rope. Rock went to climb, Triple H climbed from the outside and Rock knocked him off the cage into Show and hit the floor at 10:52 for the win. Triple H and Show tried to attack Rock after but Triple H ended up hitting Show with a chair when Rock moved as the program ended. The SmackDown taped March 7th at the Fleet Center in Boston before a packed house. In dark matches, Funaki beat an unknown assailant. Inferno Kid beat Tim Laurie. Inferno looked impressive. For March 12th heat, Jericho beat Malenko in a great match and dropkicked Guerrero off the top turnbuckle as he tried to interfere. Edge pinned Bossman. Terry was out there. Too Cool beat Headbangers. Grandmaster's pants fell down when he was dancing. Mosh and Grandmaster were playing catch with their cones. Matt Hardy beat Viscera after a lot of interference by Jeff. For SmackDown, Triple H opened talking about 3 handicap matches on the show for Rock, Rikishi, and Kane. The posse again tried to get the hardcore title from Crash, but Crash got away again and it ended with Pete Gas pouring liquid detergent all over one of the other guys. Rock won a handicap match over Benoit and Saturn. Malenko and Guerrero ran in after. Stephanie ordered Rock to wrestle another handicap match against Dudley's in a table match. Rios kept the light heavyweight title beating Christian. Edge speared Lita near the finish. Said to be a great match. Taz beat Angle via DQ for the IC title when Taz had the choke on, but Backlund ran in and put Taz in the chicken wing. Jericho made the save and put the Boston Crab on Backlund. Dog and X-Pac beat Kane in a handicap match after Tori interfered. Karen Marr was doing a gimmick, which may not air on TV, insulting the audience for being fat while teaching them to exercise. Blackman pinned Jeff Hardy clean. Dudley's beat Rock when they gave him a 3D through the table. Jacqueline keeps women's title pinning Ivory Fast with a DDT. Crash Holly and Prince Albert went to a no decision for the hardcore title. Show and Triple H beat Rikishi in a handicap match on top, but Rock came out and helped Rikishi rub his ass in Triple H and Show's face after the match. Too Cool and Rikishi danced. Overall impression is that the crowd wasn't that into the show. SmackDown taped February 29th in Trenton, New Jersey was a pretty good show. Best match was the opener with Radicals over Too Cool and Jericho in 5:23. Grandmaster did the leg drop off the top on Saturn, but Benoit came off the top with a headbutt while the ref was distracted and Saturn got the pin. Real good match. Jeff Hardy beat Esse Rios via DQ in a light heavyweight title match. Rios has a lot of potential but is still doing things in the ring that he can't hit. Hardy was tremendous. Lita did that great head scissors off the stairs onto the floor. Jeff did the Swanton, actually called that credit Edie Simpson for that term, but Lita interfered for the DQ. Shane McMahon and Big Show did an interview with Shane saying he had to stop Rock before he got to the same position Austin reached because then it would be too late. Rock came out and challenged both to a handicap match. Rikishi came out and said he wanted to be Rock's partner. They never gave a very good explanation as to why Shane didn't wrestle when the match finally came down. Angle and Sergeant Slaughter had a really contrived confrontation. Crash Holly beat Taz in 152 in a hardcore title match that was mainly backstage. Bossman and Albert both tried to interfere but Taz laid both out with a giant wrench. Some people who follow Indies wrestling would know there was major heat with Taz and Crash a few years ago stemming from the brief period Aaron O'Grady worked ECW. After Taz laid the two big guys out, the little guy hit him with a fire extinguisher and bored for the pin. They did a series of vignettes throughout the show where Blackman was out with a blind date from hell set up by Snow. This was pretty funny. The girl was a weirdo who couldn't shut up, so she and Snow ended up hooking up at the end. Crash Holly told Lillian Garcia that the hardcore title is up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if a ref counts his shoulders down, then he loses the title. Road Dogg and X-Pac as a new age Outlaws beat Christian and Edge in 4:47 when Christian was distracted as Terry, at ringside, slapped Edge, got a low blow and X-Factor and was pinned. Christian shoved Edge down after the match. Test pinned Viscera after a body slam and elbow off the top in 3:47. This wasn't anywhere near as bad as it sounds. Angle pinned Slaughter in 3:01 with his slam. Slaughter, 51. Looked really heavy but he did a real good job, including taking one of his trademark early 80s bumps over the top rope. Dudley's beat Kane via DQ in a handicap match when Kane choke slammed Devon through a table in 4:56. This wasn't anywhere near as good a bump as Crowbar took on the same spot. Match was good action. The posse attacked Crash Holly as he was going to his car. They started beating on him and magically a ref showed up and went for pins, but each member of the posse pulled the other off because they wanted to be the one to get the hardcore title. If they only paid attention to WCW the night before, they should have all pinned him and then all three could have been the hardcore champ. As they were fighting each other, Crash jumped in the car and sped off. Finally, Rock and Rikishi beat Triple H and Big Show. Triple H replaced Shane in the match. They had an explanation but it wasn't very good. Really good heat. Finish saw Rock use the rock bottom on Triple H after Show accidentally hit Triple H with a chair after Rock moved in 7:22. Triple H shoved down Show after the match. It sure looked like they are setting up a three-way. A&E came out with a listing of its 10 biggest ratings for its nightly biography show. Oprah Winfrey was number 1, Ron Howard was number 2 and Andre the Giant was number 3. It should be noted that even the repeat showing of the Andre bio when they did their WWF week drew a bigger rating than first-run showings of Mick Foley, Owen Hart or Steve Austin. Davey Boy Smith is back in rehab for excessive use of painkillers, sleeping pills, morphine and muscle relaxers. He'll be using the same clinic Steve Regal used in Atlanta and be at the clinic for at least 3 to 4 months. He was promised to have a job waiting for him when he returns, but if he doesn't complete the treatment, he'll be fired. While the WWF tries to keep things like this somewhat confidential, this was trumpeted in the Calgary Sun and later in the other Sun chain papers, complete with the news that McMahon is paying $75,000 for the rehab. I think it's great Smith is getting help because he was on the verge of something serious from all accounts, and great that McMahon is taking care of it, and for the sake of Davey Boy, I'm glad to see it no matter what the motivation behind this is. But if anyone can't see that the way this has been presented to the media makes it a public relations investment, not to mention the role Smith plays in a high-stakes lawsuit for McMahon's benefit as well, they are missing a piece, and it may be a big piece, of this puzzle. If this becomes a regular deal where the company trumpets up these incidents so publicized with everyone and McMahon offers to pay everyone's costs, and not only that, somehow without in the future trumpeting up the costs of the rehab themselves getting publicized so loudly, which is where the thing came off as self-serving PR, then at that point he should be commended. Commending the company for doing something with company PR being a major part of it is far too reminiscent of past history. an industry that has a track record of following up negative stories with heavily publicized charitable donations. And this fits that pattern. But whatever the motivation, if they are doing something to save someone's life, that's a greater good than anything considering the industry's track record. Bret Hart wrote a column in the same newspaper a few days later, saying he hopes Smith's attempt at rehab is successful. He said McMahon's actions appear to be commendable on the surface and said in his opinion, that in itself, is the sole motivation behind McMahon's apparent sudden bout of charitable conscience. My entire point is to ask you to think about why Davey, and why now, noting Smith has had these problems for years. He finished by writing McMahon is free to prove me wrong by instituting a new WWF policy to rehab any wrestler with a drug problem, even when it doesn't serve his political agenda anymore. I'd be the first one to applaud it. Bruce Hart also wrote a story about what a loyal friend Smith could be, saying how he sacrificed his spot in the WWF in 1997 out of loyalty to Bret. It should also be noted a prime reason he was unhappy going into Montreal was because he was promised a win over Shawn Michaels in England, and went so far as to dedicate the match to his sister who was in bad shape with cancer, and when Michaels refused to do the job, the finish was changed and he ended up on the losing end. Bruce noted that he left the WWF in 1988 out of loyalty to Tom Billington in a situation with the Rougeaus that he wasn't directly part of. He described Smith's return to the WWF this year as Mick Foley and Owen Hart seeing him when he was down, and when his condition improved, opened doors for a deal with the WWF, and the WWF took him back, before Owen's death, and even gave him a raise from his old deal. Bruce was critical of Bret for condemning Smith for going back to the WWF and claimed Bret knew Smith was going back before Owen had died and that Owen actually played a part in getting him back in. In a conversation with Bret during the time, he wasn't critical of Smith going to work for the WWF since he was a wrestler and there were only 2 places to work and WCW had fired him, but he wasn't happy with him defending McMahon in the media in the wake of the accident. Bruce talked of the pressures Smith had faced, from his own health problems, to the death of his sister and mother, to explain his current problems and did tie in the situation of him going back, saying going back caused Davey to be unjustly vilified and has also made his life a lot more stressful, a factor I suspect in his recent difficult battle with drug addiction. Speaking of Steve Regal, the WWF has given him another chance, although he's been assigned to the Memphis promotion to get back in good enough shape before starting out. Regal needs a job or else he'll be sent back to England, and because of that both WWF and WCW have been hiring him when the other lets him go because of his situation. WCW just let him go in an attempt to cut the budget, so it was WWF's turn to keep him from sinking. Bruce Pritchard is now the office representative and scout at the Memphis TV tapings, and he'll also be going to some Ohio Valley TV tapings. He and Kevin Kelly are in charge of monitoring how the wrestlers under developmental deals are doing. A decision of whether to keep or cut Mike Tierney, who worked in Memphis for a long time, but hasn't worked anywhere since. They did a Loser Leaves Town program with him in Power Pro with the idea he'd start with ECW, but that never materialized. Will probably be made in a few weeks. WWF wanted Paul Heyman to take he along with Vic Grimes and Glenn Kulka, but the only ones ECW has used thus far is Grimes, and Kulka has since been fired. Steve Austin is wearing a soft neck collar most of the time. His movement is limited to doing a lot of walking and he's as of yet not allowed to lift weights. The plan is for him to debut at WrestleMania, but in a very limited role. Vince McMahon is supposed to start on television a few weeks before Mania, which may be part of an angle to reintroduce Austin. Mick Foley will be at Mania, of course. A lot of ideas have been thrown out, including one where he doesn't appear on television at all, but it will be hyped that he'll return to give a farewell address at the show. The idea of doing next year's WrestleMania at a domed stadium is under consideration. While WWF has done TV tapings from the Sky Dome and the Georgia Dome, and they seem special because of the large crowds, the feeling is there are a lot of headaches. In particular, the audio never comes across well in such a big building, the same reason the television tapings in Japan from the Tokyo Dome always have that cavernous dead atmosphere. Vince McMahon has been away from work for much of the past week due to being in Phoenix for the jury trial in Jim Hellwig's lawsuit against him and the company. I believe the case was settled out of court on March 3rd before both sides risked the jury decision, and if that's the case involving WWF, there may have been a secrecy agreement since there has been no publicity out on it. The next Judith Reagan book is scheduled to be an autobiography of Chyna. Its release may be delayed until the summer because they are changing ghost writers. There is also a Fabulous Moolah autobiography as part of their 8-book deal. This is the one that isn't going to sell, in January 2001. There was supposed to be an autobiography of Steve Austin for this year, but that has been put on hold. Rock will appear on The Tonight Show just before WrestleMania. Dwayne Johnson has also been subpoenaed to testify on March 9 in a case of a 12-year-old boy charged with first-degree murder of a 6-year-old girl in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Lionel Tate is being tried as an adult for the July 28 death of Tiffany Unick, who died after a severe beating. The defense is that Tate was mimicking what he saw on pro wrestling. Johnson wasn't subpoenaed so much because he's one of the biggest stars in wrestling, but because he lived in Miami. Because of cases like this one, both WWF and WCW have been running PSAs on many of their programs. Johnson will also play a bad guy scorpion role in the movie Mummy 2, which will be released in 2001. There will be a lot of WWF tie-ins for the MTV Spring Break week. Karen Marr did several dark segments at the February 29 taping in Trenton, New Jersey, doing a cross between a cheerleader and Sunny of the Body Donna's gimmick. The segment got mixed reviews. The company is said to like her a lot, but not necessarily in the role she was playing. The WWF was knocked out of the #1 spot in the Rec Sports home video charts for the first time in more than a year, as the home video of Super Bowl 2000 came in at #1 this past week. WWF held down spots 2 through 11 with Rock, Austin vs. McMahon, Best of Raw, Austin, Triple H and Chyna, 1998 King of the Ring, Undertaker vs. Mankind, Hell in a Cell, DX, WrestleMania 15, Women of the WWF and Best of WrestleMania 1 to 14. Overall, they had 15 of the top 20 spots, while WCW, with Sting at number 18, had 1. The situation with Kathy Dingman, BB, is that she hasn't been fired, although the odds are that she may be, and she was given the word of that. The storyline situation is that she is outselling the power bomb through the table by the Dudleys. At this point there are no plans to bring her back, and at this point she is still getting paid under the guy she's outselling in Angle, but obviously if she isn't brought back, she'll be cut. She was a hiree of Terry Taylor, who is no longer with the company, so politically that worked against her. The feeling is that her portfolio modeling shots looked great, but she had no charisma in front of the crowd. It is true that she's now an item with Bob Holly, but we're told that had nothing to do with her employment status, as if everyone in wrestling who was involved in affairs were let go because of them, the ranks of wrestlers would thin considerably. WWF The Music Volume 4 increased sales to 14,053, which moved it up to number 124 on the chart. The new CD will be released on March 21 with themes, some of which will be new, for Austin, Undertaker, Rock, Triple H, Vince, No Chance, Godfather, Big Show, Kane, Outlaws, Gangrel, DX and Mankind. In ratings for the week of February 10 to February 12 in the United Kingdom, Nitro on February 10, which went unopposed by any wrestling shows, drew 100,000 viewers. On February 11, Raw and Thunder went head-to-head, with Raw drawing 400,000 viewers and Thunder drawing 110,000. SmackDown on February 12 drew 220,000 viewers. The Royal Rumble live on Channel 4 between 1 to 4 a.m. drew 1.1 million viewers, which is considered an unbelievable figure for that time slot. There was a lot of press in Canada over a screw-up regarding the No Way Out pay-per-view show. Famous Players is airing WWF pay-per-view events at their major city complexes, since so much of Canada isn't wired for pay-per-view. At the first show, due to a screw-up on the part of Bellevue Satellite TV service, when the pay-per-view ended they flipped the wrong switch and the adult movie channel Venus aired for 30 seconds, enough time for the audiences around Canada, comprised largely of children and families, to see a naked woman on her knees performing oral sex. They did a three-way for the IC title on March 4 in Ottawa with Benoit, Jericho and Angle as a tryout for WrestleMania. The match went really well, so it's considered close to a sure thing for the big show. There's talk they'll go with a singles Jericho vs. Benoit program afterwards. SmackDown tapings on February 29 in Trenton, New Jersey drew a sellout 6,345, paying $226,327. March 3 in Toronto at Skydome drew 19,502, paying $596,654. March 4 in Ottawa drew 9,467, paying $293,282, and March 5 in Montreal drew 11,534, paying $370,178. Merchandise for the past week was $290,967 US, which breaks down to $5.49 per head, far lower than usual because of losing so much on the exchange rate in Canada. In Toronto, Rikishi scored the clean pin on Benoit with a banzai, and he and Too Cool did the dance routine. Dudley's beat Hardy's with the 3D on Jeff. They went to put Matt through a table, but the table broke early, killing the shot. Jeff dropkicked the table to pieces after cleaning house. Although Crash Holly is supposed to be defending the title 24/7 anywhere there is a ref, his match with Christian was non-title, and you can guess who won that. Angle pinned Jericho after a ref bump hitting him with the title belt. Main event was a 4-way for the title where Triple H won over Kane, Rock and Big Show when Road Dogg hit Kane with a chair and Triple H pinned him with a pedigree. Rock used a rock bottom and people's elbow on Show after the match, and they had Rock do 15 minutes of catchphrases. In Ottawa, Hardys beat Saturn and Malenko when Matt pinned Malenko. Angle won a 3-way over Benoit and Jericho by pinning Jericho after hitting him with the belt. Albert pinned Crash in what was announced as a title match and grabbed the belt as if he won, but for whatever reason Crash left with the belt. Dudley's beat Christian and Edge with a 3D. Show beat Rikishi clean in a bad match, and Rock and Kane beat Triple H and Road Dogg when Rock pinned Triple H after the match. Kane tombstone Tori and Rock gave her a people's elbow and did his routine in the ring. X-Pac missed the weekend shows due to bronchitis. Val Venus is expected back in about 2 weeks from a sprained neck. The readers' pages. Beyond the Mat. I just want to make sure you are aware of the depths to which the WWF is going to suppress the movie. They have sent us cease and desist letters for things we have every right to do, like use The Rock's likeness in our ads. As for our TV spots, after generating and signing contracts on their letterhead more than 3 weeks in advance, we find out the day of airing that the spots aren't going to run. The WWF wasn't even going to tell us. We were just calling to confirm. They have since persuaded UPN not to allow any advertising whatsoever for our film on their entire network, and are pressuring the USA Network to do the same. This type of censorship and bullying tactics have no place in our society. What is Vince McMahon afraid of? That we show wrestlers as human beings? Or is it that he was not allowed to buy into the movie and so has set out to destroy it? Tom Ortenberg, co-president, Lionsgate Films. The overriding message of Beyond the Mat is that pro wrestling is just a freak show. That is why, as Mick Foley noted from his viewing of it in a theater, the audience seemed to laugh at inappropriate times. Mainstream audiences won't be as impressed by real injuries as some fans have been. They'll respond, "These guys are even crazier and dumber than we thought." As a film, Beyond the Mat seems like a documentary by numbers effort. Blaustein shows us footage of highways, road signs, buildings, doorways, and secretaries as if those cliches are the thing that makes a documentary great. What really makes a documentary great is authenticity and insight. Beyond the Mat lacks both. Blaustein admits in the movie that he arranged a WWF tryout match for 2 guys from APW. He also admits that he arranged a screen test for New Jack, and that he suggested a meeting between Jake Roberts and his daughter. These contrived situations undermine the authenticity of Blaustein's documentary. One begins to wonder if Blaustein played a role in Mick Foley's decision to have his wife and 2 young children at ringside during an horrific beating, or if Blaustein played a role in what is passed of as a chance encounter between Terry Funk and Dennis Stamp, where Funk learned that Stamp wasn't planning to attend Funk's retirement show. Setting aside these questions of authenticity, Blaustein has captured some remarkably candid footage which could lead to new insight into the wrestling business and lifestyle. Unfortunately for the viewer, Blaustein seems too preoccupied with sensationalizing his subject matter to notice. 2 of the most critical scenes in the film are short interviews with Spike Dudley and Jake Roberts. In the space of a couple of minutes, Spike explained that he's willing to suffer abuse to hear the roar of the crowd. In doing so, Spike cuts through all the seeming contradictions in Foley's core motivation, but Blaustein misses the connection completely, instead going for laughs by pointing out that Spike studied English literature in college. Roberts has several telling scenes, but the most critical is the scene where he explains how the physical demands of pro wrestling encourage drug use, from taking sleeping pills and painkillers to get rest, to taking cocaine to get up for the crowd. But Jake's credibility is sabotaged by the fact he's in a crack-induced stupor, so this important insight seems more like an addict refusing to take responsibilities for his own actions. One wonders that Blaustein didn't show Spike's interview to Foley and ask for a response, or interview someone like Ted DiBiase or the Dynamite Kid to validate Roberts' comments about how the demands of pro wrestling promote drug use. Perhaps Blaustein was too busy, or perhaps he was simply looking to sensationalize pro wrestling rather than document it. In an interview with You, Blaustein revealed that he had originally planned to include Brian Pillman and Louis Spicolli, but they died before he got a chance to film them. The overall feeling of the movie is voyeuristic, like the Jerry Springer Show without confrontations between the accused and the accuser. Blaustein shows us footage of Jake Roberts explaining how Grizzly Smith raped his mother, then counters with footage of Grizzly saying Jake was born out of love. Scenes like that made me feel a little dirty, as if by attending the film I was endorsing and promoting Blaustein's dishonest attempts to humiliate the people who appeared in his movie. Some of them may be freaks or bad people, But there is something very wrong about the dishonest way in which Blaustein captured and showcased them without their knowledge. Beyond the Mat humiliated or embarrassed almost everyone who appeared in it, but the feedback from the fans who admire these people on a personal level has blinded many of them to the effect of the film. I'm fairly confident that if I allowed a filmmaker complete access to my professional and private life, he could find enough unflattering moments to totally humiliate me. The mystery of Beyond the Mat is why so many wrestlers decided to chance that outcome by sharing their professional and private moments with Barry Blaustein and his camera crew. Frank Jewett. Response from Dave Meltzer. Mick Foley's children being at ringside was because Vince McMahon had initially wanted them involved in the finish of the I Quit match. Due to negative media criticism that had just started regarding marketing to kids, McMahon changed to the more physically violent finish, I believe the night before the match, and the kids were put at ringside by the WWF. The funk stamp thing was authentic. I wanted to thank Barry Blaustein for making this movie and showing non-fans just how real the business can be. I hope a lot of sports purists see this film and get a little attitude adjustment. Perhaps they'll come away with a little appreciation for wrestlers as legitimate athletes and human beings. Greg Anderson. Kelso, Washington. WWF's excuse for banning the advertising of Beyond the Mat on their networks is obviously lame and dishonest. On SmackDown last night, as well as on previous Raws and SmackDowns, the ECW Hardcore Revolution video game commercials have been running consistently. Why isn't this considered a competing wrestling product? The game features no WWF wrestlers, and is direct competition for the WWF's video game. Is it possible for Lionsgate to buy local spots on individual UPN stations that would air during SmackDown? I've seen ads for WCW house shows in my market during SmackDown. It might be possible to individually buy in the markets the movie is playing and bypass the network execs. I suppose this depends on whether the ban will trickle down to the local station level. Since local stations get to keep most or all of the money from the local spots, they probably wouldn't appreciate being told by a network they have to reject an advertiser because the WWF has a grudge. Even if this fails, it could raise the issue, which may not help the movie's theatrical release, but might prevent this from happening in time to promote the video or DVD. I hope they take the WWF to court. The WWF is setting a dangerous precedent that should be legally disputed. It's more than a question of money. It's a question of right and wrong and power being abused. We don't need the Vince McMahons and John McCains of the world determining what entertainment products succeed and fail. If products like the UFC and Beyond the Mat fail at the consumer level, it should be because the products failed to attract paying customers, not because powerful people with personal vendettas struck them down ahead of time. Steve Queen. Ypsilanti, Michigan. Response from Dave Meltzer. The ECW game ads were bought at the local level. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities.